Okay, before you start this episode, I'm going to ask you, the listener, to do a couple of things. First, if you're not yet a subscriber to the Mormon Renegade Patreon channel, go there now and sign up for either the $6 or $12 tier, because there's some photos that go along with this podcast that you're definitely going to want to see. Second, go and take the batteries out of your smoke detectors, because we're going to cover some gospel topics that are going to blow your mind. I have Ken Peterson back on the podcast, and we discuss the origins and destiny of the earth and its people. This is an expansive, comprehensive, all-encompassing discussion that was absolutely amazing. We start looking at some of the hidden gems from the scriptures and quotes of early Mormon leaders. We discuss everything from the age of the Earth's place in the universe pre and post fall, the Earth's ultimate relocation after the millennium, pre-Adamites, and Mormon cosmology. We then finish our conversation by talking about what this really means to us as Mormons. So prepare to have your minds blown and expanded on this episode of the Mormon Renegade Podcast. Look, it's no secret that our society has become much more crude and coarse. To become and raise men and women of virtue and character is a Herculean task. To help with this, I have recently wrote and published a book. Now, back in the 1700s, Washington had a book called Rules of Civility and Decent Behavior in Company and Conversation. It was a book with 110 rules that talked about how to conduct yourself like a civilized person in society, something that today's society is sorely lacking. What I did is I went back through the book and I reinterpreted his original sayings for the 21st century. So the book is laid out in a way in which you see Washington's original rule. Right below that is my explanation for the 21st century, and below that you'll find 2 or 3 examples of where to use this in the real world. Now, to go along with this, there's a workbook that helps parents teach these principles and practices to their kids. To find the book, go to MormonRenegade.com, go to the bottom of the page, search out the blog post, and order your copy today. I can bear personal testimony from personal experience that this is an invaluable tool to help you raise men and women of virtue and character. Well, Ken, how's it going?
Going really well.
Dude, when we talked about this, I guess a week, maybe 2 weeks ago, I don't know, my days run together now. But when we talked about this, I was super stoked for this one. So for those of you at home, what I want you to do is I want you to have like some duct tape or something like that real handy, because we're going to go over some mind-blowing kind of stuff tonight. And you're going to want to be able to piece that head back together when it kind of explodes.
And some tinfoil hats, right?
And so maybe some tinfoil hats, right? This is gonna be good stuff. I've been looking forward to this one for a week now. So, Ken, what are we talking about, brother?
Well, you cracked me up, and it's probably why we're friends. I gave you this list of potential topics that we could discuss, and you immediately went for the metaphorically and literally the most far out topic there is, the most expansive topic there is. And I'm like, great, let's do this. So fasten your seatbelts, everybody, because this is going to be out there. So yeah, I'm super excited for this.
All right. Well, let's fire it up. What do you got?
All right. Oh my goodness. Let me go to the beginning here. Oops. Oh, sorry about that. Are we seeing that?
Nope, not seeing it yet.
Are you sharing the screen?
I think so. All participants can share.
Let's see what's going on here, because I'm showing it. Oh, come on. Share screen. Boom. There we go. Sorry about that.
There we go. Nice.
Earth's origin and destiny. That is huge. Otherwise known as the plan of salvation, the exploded plan of salvation. Um, and I'll preface this by saying that most of this is based on two extremely influential books on my own personal thinking, in addition to my own research. But Earth in the Beginning by Eric Skousen, Cleon Skousen's son, with multiple scientific degrees, and The Kolob Theorem by Lynn Hilton, PhD, retired professor at Brigham Young, where they talk about the plan of salvation as it applies from eternity to eternity in one eternal round, and what that implies. So tonight, when you can't discuss Earth's origin and its destiny without discussing astronomy, because of Brigham Young primarily, or without discussing prehistory because of Joseph Smith and because of science. And my own thinking, to preface this discussion, when I first gained a concrete personal knowledge of the truthfulness of the restored gospel, it was never an issue of the gospel or science. In my mind, if the gospel is true and if the science is true, they're going to say the same thing. Or as Eric Skousen put in the preface to his book, he said, when religion and science are both fully understood, they will not disagree. Right? They're coming at it from different angles, the truth.
Well,
so,
yeah, and you go to like quotes by Brigham Young, right? Like where all truth belongs to Mormonism.
You're right.
And so, and that's one of the things about Mormonism that I love too, is this idea of no, science and religion don't have to be at odds. So, yeah, no,
so throughout my life, my mind has quite innately worked at reconciling, just naturally because it was fun, reconciling what science thinks it knows with what we understand about the restored gospel, which is not yet fully restored for that matter. So we're going to talk about how the earth came to be, when the earth came to be, and how it fits in the eternal scheme of things. Ultimately, where it came from and where it's going. So that's a lot.
So just a little,
Yeah. We begin appropriately with Joseph Smith. You ask the learned doctors why they say the world was made out of nothing, and they will answer, doesn't the Bible say he created the world? So right off the bat, Joseph Smith is addressing young earth creationism. And I love to get in these discussions because opponents of Mormonism simplistically believe that we're idiots and, we're science deniers and all of that, which is far from the truth. So Joseph Smith from day one made it clear that we're not young earth creationists. He goes on, and they infer from the word create that it must have been made out of nothing. Now, the word create came from the word bara, which does not mean to create out of nothing. It means to organize, the same as a man would organize materials and build a ship. Hence, we infer that God had materials to organize the world out of chaos, chaotic matter, or as referenced in other places, matter unorganized, which is element, and in which dwells all the glory. Element had an existence from the time he, God, had. The pure principles of element are principles which can never be destroyed. They may be organized and reorganized, but not destroyed. They had no beginning and can have no end. So here he is in the 1840s talking about the law of conservation of matter and energy. Wow. Cannot be created nor destroyed. One of those, 100 years ahead of his time.
Right.
Right. So he goes on. How do you like that photo?
I bounce back and forth. There's a part of me that thinks that could be legit.
I included it just because I'm tired of the old, pretty boy images of him. And of course, this is a painting based off of the little photo in the locket.
Okay, I'm curious. Do you think that's sidebar? Do you think that's the an actual photo of Joseph Smith?
I don't know.
Okay.
The reason I like it, this looks like a man who knows hardship. This looks like a man who knows farming and working with his hands. Looks like a man who likes to wrestle.
Yep. Yep.
Not not some East Coast dandy, like many have portrayed to be.
Right.
Here's the most interesting thing, one of the three most interesting things he has ever said. He says the world and earth are not synonymous terms. They
Mm,
don't mean the same thing. The world is the human family. This earth was organized or formed out of other planets, which were broke up and remodeled and made into the one on which we live. Again, the elements are eternal.
let's
Here
let's
is,
talk let's
go
talk
on.
about this for a minute, right? Because this is absolutely a radical departure from Christendom as we've known it for so long, right?
And the science of his day.
Yeah, yeah. So he's not talking just, well, it's always couched in religion, but he's revealing some things that mankind, in terms of scientists, would not come to recognize for another 100 years.
Exactly. Exactly. Planet formation. In fact,
Yep.
we didn't have a clear picture of that until within the last couple of decades when we
Right.
could actually take photographs of planet formation.
Yep.
And we know that planet through there, the star goes supernova and all the chaotic elements begin to coalesce again, forming bodies and orbiting bodies. And we can actually witness what Joseph Smith taught 200 years ago.
Right.
Now, but I'm going to blow your mind a little more because we know that how that's talking about the actual co the actual coming together of planetary bodies. I think he might be talking about something else. Brigham Young, and I wanted a young picture of him. So
Nice.
Brigham Young said, "This would suggest that the family of the gods are continually recycling the planetary and stellar elements of the universe until these elements are permanently associated with an eternal cosmic organization. This pattern of cosmic creation follows the principle that when the elements in an organized form do not fill the end of their creation, they are thrown back to be made over again."
Mm.
Think of this. Here's a man 170 years ago talking about the recycling of the stellar elements.
Right.
Most people today don't go there. And here this man is
Let
with
me
nothing,
ask
with his mind and the restored gospel, pondering these things.
let me ask you this question, because this jumped out at me. When the elements in an organized form do not fill the end of their creation, they are thrown back. What do you think Brigham means there by not filling, that they do not fill the end of their creation? What do you think he means?
I'm so glad you asked. Spencer W. Kimball taught that although some planets have gone on to perfection, like this Earth will, other planets have gone out of existence through self-destruction because they do not fill the measure of their creation.
So, okay, so now this is going to be such a fascinating episode, because now I'm going to ask
This is just the tip of the iceberg.
So now I'm going to ask this question. By them not filling the measure of their creation, is that because of the elements themselves, or is that because there were a population that did not fill the measure of their creation?
Let's go on.
Okay.
When we say unorganized matter, what do we tend to think of?
To me, I would think of rocks floating in space and then being brought together to be organized.
I'm suggesting that what we're viewing right here is probably the most common form of unorganized matter.
Okay.
This is Mars. So it is a planet, but it is devoid of life. Unorganized matter is inert matter, matter that has not been infused with life.
Okay.
So
But let me ask
So,
this:
yeah, go ahead.
it would still be filling some sort of measure of its creation, because without, like, as I understand it, and again, I'm a meathead who loves Doritos and lifting weights, but let me ask you this, because we know that this Goldilocks zone that our planet inhabits, right? Could this planet be filling the measure of its creation by staying in its proper orbit and keeping our gravity in check, so to speak, and keeping this nice clockwork pattern that we've
Sure.
enjoyed for so
Oh,
many?
sure. Oh, sure.
Okay.
And this is toward the end of our discussion.
Well,
But
my
the book of
bad.
Moses says that when the earth is exalted and enters the celestial realm, another world shall take its place.
Oh, okay.
So
All right.
this Goldilocks zone doesn't go to waste because
Right.
we're finding that they're not too common. I mean, we now know for the first time in history that there are planets orbiting every star, but
Mm-hmm.
not every star is capable of supporting human life as we understand it. And there are lots and lots of planets who are not in that Goldilocks zone. But what I'm suggesting, I want to go back and forth. Contrast Mars and Earth. Similar orbits. Similarly, I mean, they're close enough in the Goldilocks zone that they're comparable. Similar in size, but they could not be more different.
Right.
Look at this Earth, this terrarium in the vacuum of space, which is so perfectly ordered and organized. You and I can go outside naked if we wanted and be just comfortable and fine. I mean, we don't even require protection in
Right.
this perfect terrarium of a space.
Right.
How wonderful, how rare, how against the odds is that, right? When
Right.
we could be this.
Yeah.
And it's abundantly clear that Mars once had oceans.
Right.
So there's a part of me that thinks, no, let's go on for now. This is what science currently believes about the history, the prehistory of Earth. Starting on the left-hand side, we see the whole thing, 4.6 billion years to the present. And as far as science knows, in terms of the geological record, there are no signs of any life whatsoever in the geological record until about 500 million years later.
Right.
So about 4 billion years pass with no significant sign of life. And then we see this part expanded here, 600 million BC to the Common Era. And we see these are the things we hear about, the Cambrian explosion, the
Mm-hmm.
first sign of this explosion of complex life forms. And then we go into the Devonian and the Permian, and then we get to the most famous Jurassic, Cretaceous, Triassic periods, and then leading to the Tertiary period. And then we expand that last, what is that, 60 million years, Paleocene, etc., the Miocene. And we don't get to the appearance of man until this little sliver, clear at the tippy top, the
Right.
Holocene.
Right.
The Holocene. The earliest humanoids, and we'll talk about them too.
Right. Let me ask a quick question here. The
Yeah.
Cambrian explosion, that's when we first start seeing complex life. But I don't think we're doing it justice, because it's not like just one life form, right? It seems to be
No.
an explosion all at once of all these varied life forms that really show up, and in some ways kind of defy evolution to a large extent, because they just show up, right?
Have
They're
you
just
gone through
there.
my notes? Have
No,
you?
no, I'm just,
Because
again, I don't.
you're totally leading this discussion. This is
No,
awesome.
no,
So
I just don't sleep much, and so I read
so
about
this
useless.
is what science says. Does this jive with the restored gospel? Joseph Smith again. Eternity has been going on in this system, not this world, almost 2,555 millions of years.
Hmm.
That was 1845. shortly after his martyrdom. And he was being quoted by W. Phelps to William Clayton.
So
So Joseph, mind you, geologists at the time in 1845 were estimating the age of the Earth at 40,000 years. Now, we wouldn't say 2,555 millions of years. We would say 2.555 billion.
okay.
That's the number he's talking about.
So when he says not this world, because we just read a quote where he talks about a world means people, right? Essentially, people on a planet.
Yes, yes.
He's when he says not this world, he's basically saying before man, right? Before man ever got here, this system, and I assume he's talking about the Earth and maybe our direct solar system, has been going on.
Or he could be talking about the track that we are on,
Okay.
this system, which, I mean, what I love about this statement is it's so bold in its uh, chronological scope. I mean, it is way beyond anybody of his time estimating they weren't even thinking in terms of billions. He
Right.
was,
Right.
which is significant. This is not too far off from 4.5 billion years that the people say this Earth has existed. Some people have interpreted this statement to mean our system, our from the time we were born as spirits, when our intelligence was fused with spirit matter, which we'll also talk about, to the present day, 2.555 billion years. Now, it's funny to me, he didn't say 2 billion years,
Right.
or 2.5 billion years. This is a very specific number. So, what he's talking about is a time period that defines the duration of a generation of gods, meaning how long it takes for the offspring of God from the point of their birth to becoming gods themselves.
Oh, okay.
Some have interpreted that to mean he has just given us how long an eternity is,
Okay.
a generation of gods. We're going to talk a lot about eternity right now. First, let's talk about this number. By the way, most people don't know that's what Kolob looks like. Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah, it is cool.
I don't know if that looks like Kolob, but it could be, right? We know from scripture that a day on Kolob is equal to 1,000 years on earth. Why is Kolob significant?
The start.
God reckons time on earth by Kolob. Our times are related, though different. And
Okay.
the Kolob is nigh unto the celestial. Is Kolob celestial? No. What is nigh unto the celestial? The terrestrial.
Right.
And that Brigham Young and others taught that the earth, when it was first formed, or the world, when it was formed, was nigh unto Kolob. But we'll get into that. But we need to talk about this number and the duration of an eternity. So on earth, by our time, we know an eternity. If assuming for the sake of discussion that this is the length of an eternity, the question becomes, how long is that on Kolob? And is that a significant number? Now, mind you, Joseph Smith didn't finish this equation for us. He gave us all the pieces, meaning he either knew the answer and didn't give it to us, or he didn't have the answer yet himself. But the number is still extraordinary, as we shall see. So if a day on Kolob is 1,000 years, a year on Kolob is 365,000 years on
Right.
Earth. Now that we know that, we can do the math backwards. If an eternity on Earth is 2.555 billion, we can deduce how many Kolob years that is by dividing 2.55 billion by 365,000.
Okay. I see where you're
So
going.
fasten your seatbelts.
Wow.
The duration of an eternity on Kolob is 7,000 years.
Whole lot of years.
Exactly.
Okay.
I mean, you do the math. And when I
Yep.
tell people this, I make them get their calculator out because they don't believe me.
Right.
And an eternity, a creative epoch, a generation of gods, the time it takes for us to progress from baby spirits to resurrected exalted beings is 7,000 years on Kolob. Why is that number significant?
Because that was the 7,000 was the number that people thought for a long time, how the age of the earth, right? That
The
we
earth was created in 7 creative
right.
periods.
Yep.
That the order of God is based on the week.
Right.
And in section 77, it tells us that the temporal existence of this earth is 7,000 years.
Mm,
Temporal, meaning in time.
right.
Ta-da! So, and 7,000 in the number 7 is whole, complete.
Right.
This, what are the odds that an eternity on Kolob is 7,000 years? That's crazy. Let's
Yeah.
go on.
Yeah. And the fact that Joseph calls out that, I won't even pretend, that 2.5 billion years or whatever, and then it all kind of gets whittled down to 7,000. That's a hell of a coincidence, right? I
It
mean,
is.
he's a pretty good guesser. Um,
Doctrine and Covenants. His purposes fail not, neither are there any who can stay his hand. From eternity to eternity, he is the same, and his years never fail. Joseph Smith used this phrase a lot in scripture and in his speech, speaking of eternities in plural. And in my book, you'll see a lot of that too. I forgot to include that the ancient texts talk about eternities in plural. So eternity can mean forever, or in very often it is like, we have we have decades, centuries, millenniums, and eternities.
right. Right.
It's an epoch of time.
And this is the genius of Joseph Smith, right? I want to point that out. Is that, and I shouldn't say the genius of Joseph Smith. This is
Yeah.
the genius of what was revealed to Joseph Smith.
Well, it's
Is
the mind
that,
of God,
yeah,
but that
it's
Joseph
that
Smith could comprehend it
for the
is to his
first
credit.
right, for the first time in human history, man is put into proximity to the divine,
Yeah.
the deity, because of
Yep.
Joseph.
Well, and we skipped I mean, this is another discussion. Um, the how modern science, the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith in the light of modern science.
Right.
When he teaches that time is not the same everywhere, what is he teaching? He's teaching the theory of the relativity of time.
Right.
Right? What again, a century ahead. Anyway, now we get to this bottom quote. It is the first principle of the gospel to know for a certainty the character of God, and to know that we may converse with him as one man converses with another, and that he was once a man like us. Sadly, this is where most people stop, because he goes on to say he wasn't exactly a man like us. He was mortal, but he explains it. Yea, that God himself, the Father of us all, dwelt on an earth the same as Jesus Christ himself did. And I will show it from the Bible. And then he goes and quotes, I think it's John 17, where Christ says, I do nothing but what I have seen the Father do.
Mm,
So, what he's teaching us here is that our Father in heaven was the Savior of his eternity.
right. Right. The progressions of godhood.
And of course, that has implications regarding the previous. I mean, if you extrapolate what's happening to us and
Right.
where we came from in the previous eternity and where we're going and what's going to, that implies a lot of things that we're not prepared to talk about tonight.
Right. Yeah.
But so here's John Taylor. I have to tell you how surprised I am at how deep thinking these people were,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the people of our generation are. John Taylor, well done for Mormonism. It unravels the little mysteries which, like a fog, hide the serene atmosphere of heaven, and looks from world to world, from system to system, from universe to universe, and from eternity to eternity, where in each and all there is a presidency of gods, and gods many, and lords many. And by the way, he's quoting Corinthians there.
Mm-hmm.
For Paul said that. And he said, although there be lords many and gods many, to us there is but one God and one
Right.
Savior. And from time to time, or from eternity to eternity, Jesus Christ shall bring in another world, regulated and saved as this will be when he delivers it up to the Father, and God becomes all in all.
Wow.
Now, riffing on this theme, say what you will about Bruce McConaughey, he encapsulates this teaching and extrapolates this teaching better than anyone else I've heard. And look, it's a photo of him actually smiling. I like.
I didn't think he could do that.
You look at him, you don't recognize him, do you?
No, he has teeth.
As men view things from their mortal perspective, there was a past eternity, and there will be a future eternity. The past eternity embraced the sphere of eternal existence, which all men had as the spirit offspring of exalted parents in pre-existence. The future eternity will be that eternal sphere in which the righteous, having gained both immortality and eternal life, will themselves become exalted parents and have a continuation of the seeds forever and ever. Quoting Doctrine and Covenants. In this sense, eternity becomes a measure of eternal time. Those past ages when all men dwelt in the presence of their eternal Father were one eternity, and those future ages when these spirit children will have gone on to exaltation, having spirit children of their own, will be another eternity. He goes on, having in mind this eternal, unending repetition of the eternal plan of creation, redemption, and salvation, it is plain what our Lord meant when he said he was from all eternity to all eternity in Doctrine and Covenants. And also when he said of himself, from eternity to eternity, he is the same, and his years never fail. In other words, Christ, as an eternal exalted being, never varies. From one eternity to the next, he is the same. From preexistence to preexistence, his course goes on in one eternal round. And so will it be with all exalted beings. Those who become gods will then be, from eternity to eternity, everlastingly the same, always possessing the fullness of all things and multiplying their race without end. And I love this little summation from this lovely book. The process of begetting spirit offspring, preparing earths on which they may dwell, and perfecting all things is an endless divine cycle, one eternal round, as described in the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants. Among other things, such a round may equal one eternity, or one creative epoch of the gods.
Ooh.
I love that, rings true to me.
Yeah.
And I meant to say at the beginning of all this, I teach gospel doctrine, and I will never teach this as gospel doctrine. What we're doing is what Brother Brigger did. We're reckoning, but I have to say, we're reckoning based. I mean, I'm not just freewheeling based on nothing, you know. So
right.
it's not official doctrine.
Right.
But we are quoting prophets and well thought people and scripture.
Right.
Which has not, the fullness of which has not yet been revealed, but this is fun. So now we come back to Joseph Smith's statement. The world and earth are not synonymous terms. The world is the human family, otherwise known as what? The world of Adam.
Right.
From earth in the beginning. Some have suggested that the earth's fossilized life forms are remnants from these older planets and have nothing to do with anything that ever lived on this earth, anciently or now. However, this idea presents us with several problems. So people imagine that there was this planet that had dinosaurs, and the planet was smashed into smithereens, and it came back together, and every once in a while we'll find a dinosaur bone sticking out. that it didn't live and die on the surface of our planet. So far, so good.
Yep.
Here's the problem with that thinking. And I'll get to the why a lot of people have a hard time with this, and we'll discuss why that is. Here's the problem with that type of thinking. First of all, the crust of the Earth is ultra thin. It is, relative to the bulk of the Earth itself, extremely fragile and carefully constructed. If fossils from broken up planets are part of the crust, why are they on and within this thin surface rather than somewhere deep in the body of the Earth? And it's more specific than that. They're always found at the same depth or the same geological layer in the same sequence. We might accept a jumble of fossils scattered at random throughout the crust as coming from older
Can
planets.
can I interrupt you real quick before you start reading that?
Oh
Because
yeah, yeah.
you said something there, and I wanna go back to this because this is kind of critical in a new Earth versus old Earth kind of thought. You're making the contention here that we find all these animals in roughly the same stratum as you
Yep.
dig. Thought being that if these were creatures on a different planet, that and they were just fossilized on that other planet or whatever, and as they would come in, we would expect to see them more dispersed and intermixed. Is that kind of what
Right.
I'm drawing from that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And we're going to explain this more, but you're exactly right. But the facts of fossil placement are just the opposite. There is a very carefully established sequence in the Earth's strata. Would the family of gods deliberately put fossils from older planets in and on the Earth in a carefully ordered pattern just to baffle and mislead us concerning their origin? What would be the purpose of that?
Yeah.
Not only that, but this strata, and they're named here, and the further down you go, the more ancient they are. This is a world map of where these fossils are found. It's everywhere. It's not isolated, it's everywhere. The strata and the remains of these prehistoric creatures are everywhere. The inescapable truth is they lived on the surface of this planet. Okay.
Yep.
So, how do we reconcile that with what Joseph Smith said? We're going to go to that right now. Eric Skousen makes this very significant statement that is true. One startling fact about these ancient remains is that most of them bear little or no resemblance to plants and animals living today. So, in the geological record, at the end of the Cretaceous period, the dinosaurs disappear. And in the Tertiary period, new creatures come about that bear little to no resemblance. That's sea life, animal life, and plant life. Completely different from the immediately preceding era. That's
And I think,
crazy.
yeah, and I think this would also be a good example of maybe what Joseph was talking about when it comes to worlds, right? When you're talking
Yeah.
it's literally, we could say it would look like a different world, but when all of a sudden you change, when you look at what the definition of a world is from a gospel perspective, now all of a sudden you start to understand that even though it's on this same rocky sphere, it is a different world. There are different inhabitants. Is that a good way of making that connection?
Thank you. Yes, that is exactly what Eric Skousen is suggesting, and that's exactly what I personally believe. The geological record, I'm going to go back to this. The life forms are so markedly different, especially in, we're going to talk about mass extinction events in a minute, which is really awesome. Whenever one of these happens between these eras, the new life forms that appear in geological terms really quickly are so different that the slow and steady state of Darwinian evolution cannot explain how that happens.
Right.
Now people are quick to point out, well, what about the shark and what about the crocodile? That's like ancient. Sure, that we shouldn't be surprised. There should be carryover given what we're going to explain in a minute. But the fact of the matter is 99 was it like 99.9% of all species which have ever walked upon the surface of this planet are extinct.
Phew. Whew.
Right? So all of this old stuff, they're not around. We are.
Right.
Well, I mean, there's so much to talk about. So, so the archaeologists, anthropologists, the neo-Darwinians who preach evolution, in a desperate attempt to explain what happens, Eric Scallon says, in fact, the fossilized strata, rather than being a reasonably continuous record of evolving life forms, is more like a record of repeated introductions of new life forms. What
Mm.
the geological record shows is an explosion of new life forms and stagnation. They remain the same for millions of years. Then they disappear, and a whole bunch of new life forms appear, and then they stagnate, and then they disappear. See what I mean?
Right.
And it's such a stark realization in the geological record that way back, I think in the 70s, a couple of archaeologists had to come up with a new theory, which they call punctuated equilibrium.
Let me translate that. Being a guy who made an excuse for drinking a lot, I'm good at this game. Punctuated equilibrium is what we like to affectionately refer to as baffling you with BS. Right?
But you know what? I have to respect to these guys, number one, that they're openly admitting the conundrum and that they're at least graphing it and trying to posit some explanation. Now, here, and what most of us don't really consider is the corner that Darwinian and neo-Darwinists have painted themselves into. If you limit yourself to no outside involvement, to no intelligent design, no God, no transplanting of life or anything like that, they don't have any other explanation.
Right.
They have to explain how somehow magically the earth gets erased and new species arrive on the scene.
Right. Real quick.
They're trying hard, and I love to, because their science is a means to an end.
Right.
This punctuated equilibrium is an admission to what the geological record is actually showing.
Right. Real quick, explain what a neo-Darwinist is.
They're the modern day Darwinists. So
Okay.
they believe that man evolved from primitive life forms, and that life spontaneously evolved here on Earth and gradually progressed to more and more complex life forms, which is not what the geological record shows.
How did that differ from Darwinism though?
Well, they've modified it to
Okay.
make it more palatable.
Okay.
And
All right.
what's fun, I've had this discussion, and believers are accused of what they call the God in the gaps theory. So when there are aspects of our geological record or prehistory we don't understand, we ascribe it to our magical power of God. I come back at them and I said, well, if that's true for me, then you're a believer of evolution in the gaps. That somehow evolution magically bridged these gaps by some magical power that you don't understand or can't explain.
Right.
And let me address here, there is solid evidence of what we call microevolution, that the law of the jungle, survival of the fittest, does function in nature. We do see species evolve within their species through selection. Macroevolution is one species becoming another species entirely. That
Right.
has yet to be proven in any real sense at all.
Right.
And so when we talk about evolution, we need to be more careful. Are we discussing microevolution, which is proven and is an interesting concept? In fact, you and I are in that very process in the plan of salvation.
Right.
But monkeys becoming humans, or amoeba becoming fish, or fish becoming dinosaurs, or that sort of thing, there is no evidence of that to date.
So would microevolution be another term for like adaptation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree with that. Here's where it gets really exciting. This is a relatively new development in the evolutionary science. It, well, I'll just read it. In geology, catastrophism theorizes that the Earth has largely been shaped by sudden, short-lived, violent events, possibly worldwide in scope. This is in contrast with uniformitarianism, sometimes called gradualism, according to which slow incremental changes such as erosion brought about all the Earth's geological features.
Mhm.
That also applies to neo-Darwinism, that evolution was possible because the Earth is so old it took all of that time for these things to evolve into higher um, life forms. And in order for that to happen, you had to have this gradualism or uniformitarianism, this steady state that nothing changes for long periods of time so that these things can evolve. Catastrophism turns gradualism on its head, turns it upside down, and there's no denying catastrophism for what I'm going to show you next. And so catastrophism is a partial explanation to punctuated equilibrium,
Okay.
why things have to start over. And we'll see what these catastrophes are. This is the single most informative graph regarding the prehistory of the Earth you will ever see. So this is backwards now. Left is current day, right is 600 million years ago, before the Cambrian period, Cambrian era. Each blue diamond is a crater on Earth that was left by an asteroid. The size of the crater is indicated by where the blue diamond is, which is
Okay.
reflective of how big the killer asteroid was. The orange squares are volcanic events. And the size of the volcanic event is also represented by how high it is on the graph. The different lines represent what we now call mass extinction events.
Ooh, and they're all punctuated by either volcanic activity or by asteroids.
Now, aren't you the smart one to make that connection? How can you not, right?
Yeah.
Now, mass extinction event, the most famous one to most, is this one on the left, this red line here, which is to be referred to as the Cretaceous Tertian, or the KT boundary. This is where all the dinosaurs disappeared. Not slowly, in geological terms, overnight. And what the geological record tells us, it wasn't just the land plants and animals that died, all sea life died as well. This was a worldwide catastrophic extinction event. And what we will see on one of the following graphs is that all of these mass extinction events, and they talk about 4 or 5, but as we look, we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, at least 8 mass extinction events, all with the same causation. Now, mind you, if it doesn't have a large asteroid crater accompanying the volcanic event, it probably just means we haven't found it yet.
Right.
And I'll show you a map of these. This is so cool to
You know,
consider.
I had a good friend, still have a good friend, who's a geologist. And he'll go on forever about rocks, and he bores me to tears. But one thing that I found interesting that he said is he said he became a catastrophist once he visited the Washington Scablands. And are you familiar with that area at all?
Oh, no.
It's up in, I want to say, northern Washington. I could be
I
wrong.
think I've heard of that. This huge erosion pattern.
Yeah,
Is that what yeah,
and the
yeah, yeah.
thing is that when you look at it, what you find is that there's a lot of formations that look like whirlpools, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
look like it had just it was violent. There's no other way to describe it. If you look
Mhm.
at the landscape, and I did a bit of surveying up there, so I was looking at it pretty hard.
Yep.
You can see that this was a massive event where a lot of water swept over
Yeah.
the Scablands and basically caused massive erosion in a short period of time.
Oh, we're going to talk a little bit about that too. But the point of this, I mean, you could make many points with this. One of the things I like to point out, all of these mass extinction events, and scientists are doing their best to estimate what percentage of life on Earth was destroyed. Every one of for the mass extinction events, they all fall between like 60 and 85% of all life on Earth that died.
Right.
My question to you is, why aren't any of them 100%?
Mm.
They can't be.
Right.
If you're a neo-Darwinist, there has to be something to continue, or Darwinism fails.
Right.
Evolution fails.
Yep.
But somehow magically, something they killed every last species dinosaurs on Earth and in the sea. Somehow, some little marmot survived so that we could evolve from that,
Ugh.
from scratch again. Catastrophism makes human evolution impossible,
Right.
makes macroevolution, in my view, impossible. Which, if you're a Darwinian, it's a horrible thing to admit, because then you have to admit intelligent design of some sort,
Right.
which is now becomes a faith question. And a
Right.
lot of them don't want to go there. Well, they get canceled too,
Right. Yeah.
So you can see where this is kind of leading. E. Nibley pointed out it. He says it's a no-brainer if the Earth gets struck by a killer asteroid. And killer asteroid, by the way, is defined as an asteroid that's about 6 to 12 miles in diameter. So about the size of St. George.
I was going to say that's not in the
Going at
scheme of things. That's not that long, right? I mean,
which is going tens of thousands of miles per hour. The kinetic energy is
right.
almost incalculable. But we're going to talk about that too. That if such a catastrophic event were to occur, of course, it's going to cause the tectonic plates to shift, which is going to trigger all kinds of volcanic activity, including mega volcanoes like we have at Yellowstone. So we shouldn't be surprised that they accompany one another. So that killer asteroids, volcanic events, and mass extinction events, surprise,
Right.
surprise, coincide.
Yep.
This is beautiful.
Yeah.
So what we see is the Earth being erased effectively, at least, I mean, really effectively, 8 times that we know of. The last extinction event was about 10,000 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
the end of the Ice Age. The woolly mammoth, saber-toothed tiger, caveman. Interesting.
That around the Younger Dryas period.
Uh, that's a bit above my pay grade. Probably, I think that's probably right if I recall,
Okay.
but I'm not going to commit to that. That wasn't part of my homework. Sorry.
No, you're good.
Here's a map of Earth's known major craters.
Ooh.
The larger the circle, the larger the impact. So the diameter of the circle represents how big the crater is. This big one is 100 kilometers across, which is about 67 miles.
Ooh.
This one here, the Chicxulub, is the one that killed the dinosaurs. It's about 120 miles in diameter.
Whoa.
We have this huge one in South Africa, a huge one in Australia, this huge one in Canada, and all these others, which inevitably is going to have some impact.
Do you have a date on that one in Canada?
The color indicates when it happened. So Chicxulub is going to be between 10 and 100. The one in Canada is going to be between 100 and 400. So it would be one of those earlier.
Okay.
Probably this one, I'm guessing.
Right.
No, probably no Siberian. So I have a number of questions.
Okay.
Well, the first comment was prior to roughly 20 or 30 years ago, no one believed that the Earth had ever been struck by a killer asteroid. We look at the moon and it's just peppered with craters. We look at Mars and we see scary big craters. But the Earth doesn't look like the moon. Clearly because the Earth is alive, there's flora, fauna, erosion, and all that sort of stuff. Until we got into space and began looking at the Earth from the space shuttle, and you'll see some of these photographs which make it abundantly clear. Because we thought that the atmosphere of the Earth was a perfect dome of protection. And certainly the smaller asteroids burn up in the atmosphere, but the bigger ones, no, they make it through. And there are bigger ones. So here's a trick question. Why are all the asteroid impact strikes on the land?
Probably. I'm going to take a stab. I'm going to take a stab, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. So I'm going to refer to you on this. But my thought would be is if, well, maybe this doesn't hold water, but I'm going to say it anyway. Not because I sound stupid even saying it. Maybe because when the land mass was all one, there was more land mass to hit.
That's a pretty good guess. Notice, is there a pattern to these asteroid strikes, or do they seem random? It looks like a random distribution.
It does.
We don't see them in the unpopulated areas as much because people haven't been around to look at them.
Right.
Or where there's heavy vegetation, they're harder to recognize. But of course, they're going to be a randomized distribution on the surface of the Earth. They just are.
Right.
Which means we have at least as many asteroids that hit what? The oceans.
Right.
And I have yet to see anybody address this in any of the literature. It hasn't crossed their minds. If we had a killer asteroid the size of the Chicxulub asteroid strike in the middle of the Pacific or the Atlantic, or more significantly, in the North Pole, what effect would that have?
So, worldwide flooding. I mean, so
what? How could that be? Noah's flood's a joke. Who can believe that?
Well,
catastrophism.
When I brought up the Younger Dryas for a specific reason. Every so often, the Earth goes through what's called the Torrid Meteor Belt. And we see, and that's why the one up in Canada caught my eye. About 12,500 years ago, there's a hypothesis that as we pass through that torrid meteor stream, that we took one of these to the Florentine ice shelf, and that was part of the reason for that mass extinction event that took place.
Let's consider for a minute at the end of the ice age was not gradual. It was sudden, to the extent that in northern Siberia they find the remains of woolly mammoths perfectly preserved, as if stuck in a freezer, standing up on all fours with food in their mouths.
Ooh.
Quick frozen.
I mean, just thinking about that, right? So sudden. No time to run, no time to hide.
They were buried
Done.
with hyper freezing ice. Right. In fact, they're standing up, but they're kind of crushed by the weight of it. And they've been standing like that ever since they died 10 to 12,000 years ago. The meat was so fresh, they were feeding it to their dogs, their sled dogs.
Whoa.
What would cause that to happen? Now, I'm going to go way out on a limb, and everybody out there in podcast land, prepare to laugh, because Ken Peterson thinks he has Noah's flood figured out.
Ooh, I love this. Go for it. Riff, my man, riff.
Which would explain, first of all, the time change. People lived longer before the flood. Or was the length of the day changed? Because that's very sudden. The flood, if there were these massive quantities of water that were locked up somewhere and then were released, where did it go? Why did it subside? Right?
Right.
And I know the problem is there's not enough water on the earth to subside all of the land mass. But that does not take into account a massive worldwide tsunami, which a killer asteroid would certainly accomplish. I was also thinking when you look at all the pre-Diluvian um, civilizations, they're all near the equatorial regions.
Right.
One in Japan, one in India, one off the coast, one in the Gulf, off the coast of the Yucatan, and they're underwater today. Why? Because in the Ice Age, far more of the world's water was locked up in the polar ice caps. We
Okay.
had glaciers coming down into the northern 48 states. So the sea levels were lower at one time because there was more water locked up in the ice caps.
All right. That makes
Then
sense.
I then I was reading in First Enoch where Noah describes the flood, and he said there are two things that stuck out. He saw the sky falling and swallowing. I wish I had time to look it up, but the sky fell and
Mm.
destroyed the earth. And he said the earth became inclined during the flood.
Ooh.
If an asteroid of sufficient size were to strike the northern polar region, which is not occupied by a landmass, it's just a big old ice cap, at the proper trajectory and speed and mass, it could shift the Earth's rotational axis. The ignorant presumption is that the rotational speed and the rotational axis of the Earth has never varied.
Right.
Why would we necessarily assume that, considering catastrophism?
Well, and we have modern day precedent for that. I remember reading an article, gosh, I want to say 7, 8 years ago, that China had built such a massive dam. Now, it wasn't
Yeah,
a lot, but it was enough that it threw a little bit of a wobble.
yeah. Change the Earth's inertia. Yeah,
Yeah. And
inertial
so
mass.
that's entirely possible. But for the sake of argument, let me say this. How do you account for the Genesis account of the flood when it says that basically like there were water was coming out of the earth as well?
Right, right. Well, we know that there are subterranean oceans,
Right.
and we know what the effect of a killer asteroid is. It's going to cause tectonic shifts,
Okay.
which are going to cause that. And there's a giant rift in the middle of the Atlantic, which is a split. And if that were to happen suddenly, that could be the case. But I maintain, especially given the evidence of northern Siberia and how those things died, that so here's again Peter putting himself out there for people to laugh at. A killer asteroid of sufficient size struck the North Pole with sufficient velocity, mass, and trajectory that it shifted the Earth's axis, which would do what to the polar ice caps?
It caused them to
It
melt.
would because it would introduce seasons.
Right.
So, so
Well,
the sea levels would rise, habitable lands would increase on either side of the equator, and if it could affect the rotational speed, where suddenly, instead of if time was passing more quickly
right.
from
That's
Adam
where
to
I was
Noah,
going. Yep.
a day could have been an 8 hour long day, which would explain why you and I have to take naps every day because our bodies weren't made for 24-hour days. They were
Right.
made for 8 hour days, kind of a thing. And who would know? It's not like they had digital devices.
Right.
Noah would be sitting there going, man, this day just seems to drag on and on. I must just be getting older, man. And no one would know except for the 8 people on the ark. Anyway,
Right.
so yeah, that's what I think happened. Now, not long after I had thought of that, and I only share it with other weirdos and people on your podcast, they did discover a significant crater in northern Greenland,
Really.
showing at the very least precedent for such thinking. Well, of course, if if uh, if asteroid strikes on this Earth or at a randomized distribution, they will have hit everywhere eventually.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so that is a viable, scientifically plausible and explanation with precedent that would explain Noah's flood. And then, of course, the erosion features in Washington and elsewhere that shows some catastrophic deluge, short
Right.
term, catastrophic short term deluge.
And I want to stop here for a second and just kind of put a disclaimer out here too, right? Because I know you well enough. You're not saying, because a lot of people will look at this from like the idea of, you know, God's a little bit involved in this, right? That deist argument that he just kind of winds up the universe and lets it go. You're not saying that. You're saying that this was all intentional with a very real God behind it, putting this down.
Well, see, again, that's my mind at work.
Right.
God's not a magician.
Right.
God is the supreme scientist,
Right.
right?
Yep.
He can do things beyond our understanding. But we've also seen him do things that we do understand how it was accomplished, but it
Right.
was accomplished for his purposes. So I'm not trying to explain away miracles.
Right.
I'm trying to understand the mind and purposes of God and how it works. And when you look at the science, you start to see a pattern.
Right.
8 mass extinction events on this planet. There's a pattern.
Right.
And the next mass extinction event has been prophesied. The earth will burn as an oven, and all the wicked will be burned as stubble. This blew my mind when someone was trying to the mechanism. How did the Chicxulub? I want to show a couple of pictures. This is the Barringer crater in Arizona. It's a small one. See that road and the little building on the side?
Yeah.
It's about 7 to 8 miles across.
True.
People thought it was a volcanic event that created that. We now know it was a small meteor, right? Which probably had a regional impact and effect, like possibly described in Third Nephi, a darkness they could feel.
Okay.
This is one seen from space in Africa, 17 kilometers or roughly 12 miles across,
Whoa.
200 million years ago. You will also see in that graph that you saw more than one asteroid strikes in the same time period.
Right.
It's not uncommon. When we saw that, I forget the name of the asteroid that struck Jupiter that we actually saw
Right.
with Hubble. It broke up, the Shoemaker-Levy asteroid. It broke up into like 3 or 4 different asteroids and struck in like a chain of events.
Oh,
That would happen on Earth too.
dude.
So you'd have a distributed disaster.
Ugh.
But here's the big one.
Is that the one off the Yucatan?
That's it. Why did it take so long for us to see it?
It was mostly underwater.
That is correct. And it was so big and so deep, densely forested, we couldn't see it other than with LIDAR
Mm-hmm.
or some sort of means beyond our visual range.
You know who you can thank for that, Ken? Thank
You?
Thank your local surveyor. That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
that's right.
That's because a lazy surveyor was like, I don't want to walk through that crap. Let's see if we can come up with something.
And the way they discovered it, they were in the Cretaceous geological layer, they kept finding iridium.
Oh,
The element of iridium only occurs in meteorites.
right. That's not a natural Earth element.
And shocked quartz because of the heat. And they all found it pointing in the same direction.
Now, shocked quartz, that's what they figure happens when you heat up sand
Superheated
quickly.
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Okay.
So these particles weren't pointing in any, they were all pointed in the same direction, indicating that they had been shot out from the same point. So they were, finding this iridium all around the world, and they are all pointing back to this central location, this Chicxulub crater in Yucatan, and that's how they found it. And that's how they identify the ages of these craters, because they can find the iridium from that crater in that geological layer. Say what you want about scientists, they really are ingenious.
Yes, they
Oh,
are.
they don't have whole pictures, none of us do, but why I love how hard they work and how smart they are. So so what does a killer asteroid look like? It will leave a crater 100 miles across, and they estimate the asteroid itself was between 6 to 12 miles in diameter. Now that what remains to be answered is, what is the mechanism that killed everything? The shock wave would have been enormous and killed everything within 1,000 miles. In fact, they found some of the remains in North America of the Cretaceous period all smashed up together, like in this big tidal event,
Ooh.
whether it was, an earth tidal wave or water, who can say? But one scientist said something very interesting. When a killer asteroid strikes a landmass, it throws all of this ejectus, all this material up into the atmosphere at supersonic speeds. And they can calculate how much that ejecta is. And he calculated the amount of energy that was released with that ejecta and calculated that it would superheat the Earth's atmosphere to like 600 degrees Fahrenheit instantaneously. That would incinerate everything on the surface of the planet.
Ooh.
And I immediately thought of the prophecy in the Old Testament that the earth will burn as an
You know,
oven.
the other reason I love these conversations is because sometimes we as mankind tend to really like to thump our chest, right? And don't get me wrong, we do some cool stuff.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not taking away from that. I'm a fan of mankind. I think there are times that not that God's ever shocked, but there's times I can imagine him going, "Look at that! They're about to, and forgive me for getting emotional about it. I had a child who was this way. When we implant something so kids can hear for the first time, right? I know that has to not shock our father, but at least have him look and go, look at what they can do, right? But with that, if we're not careful, we thump our chest at that and we say we have no need for God. And sometimes these conversations have a way of humbling us, right? Like, and put us back in our place. Like, it's a fragile thing we have created, civilization, and all the tech and
I
everything.
remember when I first became aware that the Earth is routinely struck by killer asteroids and that we haven't found, we're looking for them desperately because we know it can happen again. We know it will happen again. We have seen it happen in our lifetimes, just little ones that exploded in the air over the city in Russia,
Right?
broke all the windows and killed people just because it exploded in the air.
The
I mean, that's
Tanguska
just a
event.
little thing.
Yeah.
That's just a little thing. This is my favorite crater. This is in Canada. That thing in the bottom left hand is the tail of the space shuttle.
Okay.
The only way they didn't realize this crater was here until they built the dam and
Oh.
and the
Oh,
crater filled up with water. And then from space they went, "Oh, look, a crater. That's a big one."
that is a big one. Holy cow. Ooh.
Now here's the sobering image. So um, the world has been desperately seeking these potential, what they call near Earth objects, potential killer asteroids, and already conducting experiments to see if they can stop one or deflect one, because it would be the end of the human race as we know it, as we have seen in the past. And that is why Elon Musk is so desperately trying to get men on Mars to double our chances of survival if something like that should happen. I mean, he's serious. So what we're looking at in this picture, every green dot that you see is a near Earth object, asteroids.
Oh. Oh.
Thus far, they've discovered 18,000 of them. They
Yeah.
estimate that's 95% of them is what they're estimating.
Oh.
The Earth's orbit is the blue line here,
Right.
so it's kind of a busy place, the inner solar system.
And I think that picture there illustrates just the idea that there's a God makes it very, very evident. I have a buddy who he's a surveyor, but he got his degree in physics. And I mean, he's just extremely, extremely intelligent. And one day I asked him, because he's not religious at all. I was like, "Do you believe in God?" And he's like, "I kind of have to." And I was like,
Mhm.
"Why is that?" And he's like, "Well, one day I got to drinking and I thought I'd go ahead and run the statistical probability of what the chances
Yeah.
are that the Earth should be hit by one of these objects." And when he started doing the math, he's like, "It's nothing short of miraculous," because the science of statistical probability tells you that we should be pebbled with these things all the time and not just little ones.
Yeah, we should not be here.
Right.
I mean, let's take into account abiogenesis. How did RNA, DNA, reproducing RNA, DNA assemble itself? There is no amount of geological time in which that could happen.
Right.
Statistical probability is, I know there are like 30 zeros, which is statistically speaking a statistical impossibility that life should self-assemble on this magical terrarium floating in space, and that we should have experienced dozens upon dozens of mass extinction events, and yet here we are in our shirt sleeves.
Right. Ugh.
No, no. So here's this graph of the mass extinction events and the estimated percentages of life that perished. Notice none of them are 100%
Right.
because they can't be, or else we have to admit the existence of intelligence, a higher intelligence. So Eric Skousen, again, as we shall see, of the life forms that live or have lived on the earth, there are many kinds whose unrelated ancestry can only be traced to origins not of this earth. Their ancestors have come from different planetary systems throughout the galaxy. He goes on, before modern life could be brought to the earth, the scriptures. So, did life on earth come from other planets within our solar system? Clearly not, right? Before modern life could be brought to the earth, the scriptures tell us that all remnants of living preparatory life had to be removed from the physical globe. Of course, this would have included any hominids or near human-like animals then living on the earth.
Hmm.
Now, the world and the earth are not synonymous.
Right.
The world of Adam has nothing to do with the world of the dinosaurs directly.
Right.
Yes, dinosaur remains fuel our automobiles and that sort of stuff, right? Which I guess part of the grand scheme of things. But we're not directly related.
Right.
Now, creations that do not fill the measure of their creation are destroyed. Gratefully for us, the Restored Gospel tells us some of us, are filling the measure of our creation to be exalted, resurrected, us and the world. And we'll talk more about that and where that happens and all that sort of thing. The question that has to be asked, why did God create these previous creations to fail? Would he? I don't think so. This is pure speculation, not based on anybody else's, on Eric Skousen nor Call Up There and Went There. But we know that there are other kingdoms of glory. We know that there are other priesthoods and orders. And they're not all stupid people sitting on their thumbs. I have to believe that there are other creative forces out there that are not clearly not God, and that this earth, and we'll talk about location. And Brigham Young, I'll let the cat out of the bag now. Brigham Young said that when the world of Adam was first formed, it was nigh unto Kolob. Because when Adam and Eve were placed on this world, it was in a terrestrial state. Death had not yet entered in. And this is what most people like Bruce McConkie, the problem he had with other creations dying living and dying before Adam and Eve got here, because it was the fall of Adam and Eve that brought death into the world. The problem with that assumption is to assume that the earth has always existed, Nayant Kolob. Clearly, it has not.
Right. I want to go.
Clearly, prior to Adam and Eve, the earth was not in a terrestrial state. It
Oh,
was in a lower state where telestial creatures could be put on here to experiment upon or whatever, to live out their lives and to fail, so that matter unorganized that had suffered a mass extinction event could be brought. Yonder is matter unorganized. We will take of these materials and we will make an earth whereon these may dwell. So
okay.
they
Let's
brought that matter unorganized. Yes.
let's break this down for a minute because I think my head just exploded. So, when you say other forces of creation that aren't gods, what are you referring to there?
Well, all the Restored Gospel teaches us is that there are 3 degrees of glory,
Right.
all of which surpass our understanding.
Okay.
So they're not idiots and they're not technologically functionless. And we do know that the terrestrial is going to be busy ministering to the telestial. I mean, our comprehension of eternal realms, orders, and worlds is next to nothing.
Right.
We don't know what they're doing.
Right.
We know that it's not the holy priesthood after the order of the Son of God, which Joseph F. Smith said is the only order we know anything about.
Right.
We know the grand purpose of the order of the Son of God. We don't know what the purposes are of these other orders. And how many of these other orders could there be?
Okay. I see
There
where you.
is no space in which there is no kingdom. And there is
Right.
no kingdom in which there is no space, according to section 88. So they're
Okay.
doing something. And
Right.
certainly they don't have, they're not the only beings that are all knowing and all powerful are exalted beings.
Right.
That's Satan's great failings, despite his great knowledge, is that he does not know the future.
Right.
God
Okay.
does,
Okay.
because section 130 tells us he has this all celestial planets are made of our Urim and, Urim and Thummim, on which all things past, present, and future are manifest.
The
This giant crystal ball.
the one eternal
Related.
now.
Hmm?
Yeah. The one eternal now, so to speak.
Well, exactly. But the angels reside on a sea of glass and fire,
Right.
which is Urim and Thummim. This earth in its glorified and resurrected state, we'll read this later in the presentation, will become a sea of glass and fire, upon which all things, past, present, future, will be manifest for those who dwell upon it. Things pertaining to a lower order. If we want to see things pertaining to a higher order, we have to go to the Urim and Thummim that is given to us as we enter the celestial kingdom, upon which is inscribed the new name.
Okay.
So that's how God knows. Satan doesn't get one of those.
Right.
In order to have one of those, you have to be able to dwell in everlasting burnings and have that glory. Clearly, he can't and won't, never will.
Right.
And so that's his disadvantage and why he keeps fighting, because he thinks he has a chance, but God knows the end from the beginning. Satan does not.
Right. Okay.
Anyway, well, that was a digression. In earth in the beginning, when Jehovah and Michael came down to the physical earth, they found a crustal surface of matter unorganized, a physical globe that had gone through the preparatory stages, but was still so chaotic and unorganized that it could not harbor nor sustain modern life forms, like Mars.
Right.
You know what would really kill me? Is if we dig down deep enough in Mars and dig up some dinosaur bones, which is what they're trying to do.
Right.
They already believe Mars once had an atmosphere.
Right.
Mars once had oceans, big ones on its surface, and water that flowed on its surface. There is the possibility that there were ancient life forms there, and
Right.
that Mars, like Earth, is going through the preparatory stages.
Okay.
Is it possible that when Earth is taken into the celestial realm, that Mars will take its place? Who can
Yeah,
say?
it's
I
possible.
don't know. He goes on. It should be pointed out that none of Earth's modern life forms originated from within our present solar system. No planet or moon in our solar system harbors advanced life forms. This means that the Earth's life forms had to come from distant solar systems. Actually, he should have said distant star systems. Our star is called Sol, which is why we call it solar. Anyway,
Right.
hundreds, if not thousands of light years away. These are the secret springs or the origins of modern life forms, as Brigham Young called them. There's Brigham again, speculating like crazy that life was brought here from other worlds, which would also explain, this really conundrum, deep question. So these prehistoric life forms are clearly so different from us that we didn't descend from them.
Right.
But you cannot ignore the similarities between all of us. Even
Right.
the ugly dinosaurs had eyes, nose, and ears, and hands, and feet, and teeth, and a stomach.
Right.
We're related. And our DNA and the DNA that we have sampled from prehistoric life forms are similar. So somehow all life, as dissimilar as we are, at some point are related. I have no answer for that. I think it's awesome, though. Which brings us to um, hominids, prehistoric hominids, human-like creatures that are not us.
Right.
The Smithsonian, you know how many of them we now know of?
No.
Think we know of?
How many?
23. Neanderthal, Denisovian, and 21 others that walked on the surface of this planet hundreds of thousands of years ago.
So I want to make this clear, and I'm going to ask the question because I just want to know if evolution is really a thing. Shouldn't we see some sort of bridge species?
Yeah.
And we
Or
don't, correct?
or like we see in all of the other prehistoric life forms of at least the tertiary period, woolly mammoth, saber-toothed tiger, we see a variation of those species among us today. Or, like within the cat category or the dog category, we see hundreds and sometimes thousands, and in the insects, millions of species, variations of that one species.
Right.
Not so with Homo sapien. One.
Right.
That's it.
That
One.
appears suddenly.
I mean, now they are saying now, and this is curious, but believe it or not, they have actually done DNA analysis of Denisovian and Neanderthal.
Can't get enough of the Mormon Renegade podcast? Well, good news. We're on Patreon, and there's 3 packages that you can choose from. The first one, the Slightly Rowdy package, allows you to hear the podcast without all those pesky commercials getting in the way. For those who want a slightly more in-depth experience, there's the Stirring It Up package, where you can hear ad-free audio, ad-free video, and transcripts. Finally, for those who want to go full Renegade, that package is available too, where you can get everything in the previous 2 packages, plus an extra show where myself and Ben Winfield break down the news of the day from a very Mormon point of view. You will also get exclusive access to Renegade Chat, and on there you'll be able to talk to others about the show or whatever topics are on your mind. Go to Patreon today and get your exclusive content. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by DeseretFlag.com. I've said this before and I really mean it. Mormonism isn't just a religion, it's a culture. As such, it has its own vernacular and practices, but also its own symbols. And those symbols become even more important and prominent when you look back into our history. Perhaps one of the most recognizable symbols of Mormonism is the Deseret Flag. This is the flag that I use as cover art in this podcast. This was also used for a good chunk of time during the pioneer era in Utah. Now, today we have people who want to replace the existing Utah flag with some other progressive monstrosity. Well, I think it's damn past time that we start pushing back here a little bit in Utah. Our friends at Defending Utah are here to help you with that. Now, if you go to DeseretFlag.com, you can now purchase your own Deseret State flag. It's time here that we start making ourselves known and join the resistance against those who seek to rewrite our state's history. Go to DeseretFlag.com or check out the link in this episode's page show notes and get yours today.
And they are genetically so distinct from us that we are not the same species. We're humanoid.
Right.
But here's the crazy thing. There are certain Europeans and Asians that, according to scientists, 2% of their DNA is Neanderthal.
See, and now enters the thought of pre-Adamites, correct?
So, and the Darwinians love this because it shows this continuation that, oh, Homo sapien must have coexisted with Neanderthal. And even though they were different species, magically were able to produce offspring, like horses and donkeys producing mules.
Right.
Or if life was transplanted on Earth from other worlds, clearly there would be some sharing of the DNA. Here's the other cool thing to consider. Some have taken uh, domesticated dog DNA, and they can estimate the time it takes for those genetic changes to occur, uh, because the dog is related to the wolf. But
Right.
how long ago did the dog variation separate from the wolf? And they estimate, I think it's, if I recall, it's about 30,000 years. But the Darwinists are going to say, ha ha, see, 30,000 years ago, the dog split, blah, 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 blah. But the, what would I call myself? The punctuated equilibrium guy is suggesting that that split may indeed have happened 30,000 Earth years ago, but not necessarily on Earth.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
The possibilities are endless in terms of, and people go crazy talking about prehistoric life and life forms and creation, created periods, and all this sort of stuff. I find it the most fascinating puzzle in the world that God gave us. Millions of clues, and every time we get a new clue, it completely upsets the puzzle. For
Now,
example, yes,
oh, go ahead. Finish that thought.
you've seen the infamous tree of life,
Mm-hmm.
a diagram showing how all life forms came from one primitive life form.
Right.
That tree of life, you know how that was put together?
Uh-uh.
Using the science of phylogeny. Phylogeny, yes. Where they say, see, the human hand kind of looks like the ape hand, therefore they're related because they look the same. That's phylogeny.
It doesn't seem like good science.
But it's all they had.
Right.
And the tree of life is based on that. The scientists who are most frequently, as I understand it, jumping from the Darwinian ship are molecular biologists. Molecular biologists are those who examine and categorize DNA of the different species.
Okay.
If the is it phylogeny or phylogenic? Anyway, phylogeny. At any rate, what the molecular biologists are discovering is that the the species as they relate relative to DNA have nothing to do with phylogeny. The phylogeny as a science is false,
Right.
utterly and completely false. There was an article when this was first discovered. It was called "The Tree of Life is in Tatters." The Tree of Life is in tatters because the molecular biologists have completely destroyed it. I'm going to go crazy if I don't check this really quick. So here we go. Phylogeny. I'm glad
Okay.
I looked that up. Phylogeny. The tree of life is based on phylogeny, and it's a branch of science that's been utterly and completely disproven. The tree of life is in tatters. And so, as science does, as the science should do, it's self-correcting. Blah, blah, blah.
So, but before we move on
Yeah.
to where, I want, unless we're going to cover it later, are we going to get into like pre-Adamites later, or
No, let's have that discussion.
okay?
Let's do it now.
Because I feel like that this is kind of an important spot to have this conversation. So there is Neanderthal, Denisovan, they're all running around, right? And I'm trying to
Not necessarily at the same time.
okay, not at the same time, one or the other, right? Because we are finding common DNA. in humans
In one case, yes.
as well as taken from that sample. So Adam is placed in the garden. The fall happens. He goes out. What are the trying to be careful here. What would have been the purpose of the pre-Adamites' existence then?
This is where we need to start talking about timetables here. Doctrine and Covenant says that the temporal existence of the earth is 7,000 years.
Right.
Ken Peterson believes that Adam was placed on the earth 6,000 years ago. Well, let me back up, that the earth fell 6,000 years ago.
Okay.
Okay. These pre-Adamites, they date to 100,000 to 300,000 to 400,000 years ago. As Hugh Nibley said, they have nothing to do with us directly.
Okay.
They were long gone when Adam came here. That the earth had been erased, because with these mass extinction events, the earth has been erased, massive ones, at least 8 times that we know of. And so all of these 99.9% of species that have ever existed on this planet are extinct. Those pre-Adamites would be part of that. And they would fit the perfect description of not filling the measure of their creation.
Okay. But there had to have been some left over in order for us to have trace DNA, correct?
I didn't know. I didn't know you were. No, I didn't know you were neo-Darwinian. Just
I'm not,
I explained.
I'm not. I'm trying to
I'm kidding you, man.
understand where the that
Neanderthal
left
and Homo sapiens share 2% DNA, or so they say.
Okay. All right. I see where you're
Right.
going.
And I'm not necessarily doubting the science, but 2% is hardly convincing.
Right. Okay. All
Number
right.
one. But remember how we talked about scientists figured that the dog varied from the wild canine 30,000 years ago. That could have happened elsewhere.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
saying that wherever Adam was brought from could easily have had Neanderthal DNA in him to have
Okay.
passed down to the Shemites, apparently.
Okay. Okay. I see what you're saying now. Okay. That's what I was trying to make sense of there. So the theory, I guess, that you're thinking is that all those Adamites, pre-Adamites, were gone by the time Adam shows up in the garden and the earth falls.
That's what the timeline
Okay.
suggests.
Okay.
I mean,
Perfect.
Adam, wow, Adam's a latecomer.
Right.
Adam and his posterity, we're the new kids.
Right. Right. Now, let me ask you this question, because this has some far-reaching implications here.
Mm-hmm.
You subscribe to the idea that Adam was brought here 6,000 years ago.
Yeah.
6,000 Earth years ago.
It fell 6,000 years ago. He was placed on it before the fall. And we don't know exactly how long they were in the garden before they partook of the forbidden fruit.
Okay. Okay. So
I read somewhere, and I can't remember. Somebody had a good idea of how long that was. I know. Or in the day, it talks about that they would.
In the day thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, that, and what that is explaining. How old was Adam when he died? 900 and
900
something.
and some change. Yeah.
Right? How long is a day? 1,000 years.
Yeah.
In the day thou eatest, thou shalt surely die. And he died in one Kolob day. That's what I was reading. Okay.
Now I'm going to ask kind of a loaded question that is purely speculative, right? And I want everyone I want everyone to know I'm not saying this is the case. This just has my wheels turning now, and I got to ask the question. So, if Adam was brought here, the earth fell 6,000 years ago, right? Start the clock at 6,000 from there. Cha-chink. Now we are finding structures, megaliths that are well older than that 6,000 year range.
Like the most famous being Topkapi or something like that in Turkey.
Göbekli Tepe, yep.
Yeah.
And we're even seeing evidence of that with the Sphinx, because the Sphinx seems to have Benny wrote
Predates the pyramids. Yeah.
predates the pyramids.
Yeah.
So now we start talking about, rather than either A, the Denisovans, or any of those other 99.99% that were wiped, that's kind of an advanced civilization, right?
Well, Stone Age stuff.
Right, right. But it shows some level of sophistication
Right.
other than what science
Right.
for a long time ascribed to these beings, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Humans tend to be have a great deal of hubris.
Mm-hmm.
Because humans are capable of extraordinary things, as the current world clearly demonstrates. I mean, really miraculous things that we're capable of.
Right.
Um, we tend to think that we're the most uh, advanced species in the known universe.
Right.
That's hubris. Or to think we're the only intelligent species that have ever walked the face of this planet.
Well, yeah,
And the only reason,
and I guess the reason I went there is to show that, right? This idea that it's we focus on that 6,000 years for good reason. That's our parentage, that's our lineage, right? But there was stuff happening outside of that for quite a while.
well, yeah, that's the whole point.
Yep.
There has been some form of life walking around on the face of this planet for 500 million years, if our science is correct, living and dying on the surface of this planet. And within the last million years, humanoids.
Right. Yeah.
And humanoids who are apparently capable of making musical instruments, of having burial rites and burying each other, of creating jewelry, of being agrarian society. And I don't know, and I suppose we're surprised because it shocks us out of our hubris to think we're it, right? But as Hugh Nibley points out in one of his essays, the children of God, and all of these pre-Adamites, these hominids, even though they may not be Homo sapien, they are humanoid,
Right.
which is in the likeness of God in some fashion or another.
Right.
Some of these ancient texts talk about Earth as being a God-bearing world, as opposed to what?
Right.
Worlds that don't bear gods,
Right.
right? So that's apparently an extraordinary thing. And the previous worlds which have come and gone on this planet were not God-bearing worlds. Hence, they did not fill the measure of their creation. This creation, the world of Adam,
Right. Holy
quite
cow.
wondrously, is filling the measure of our creation to carry on the great purpose of God, which is to bring to pass the immortality and the eternal life of man.
To propagate
So
his species. The God.
to propagate the plan.
Yep. Awesome. All right. Yeah, that was it. I just wanted to cover that now that we've blown
So
everybody.
yeah, we shouldn't be surprised if they were hominids and they had brains equal in size to us, if they had some level of intelligence.
Right.
But clearly not the level of intelligence that would allow them to become exalted.
Yeah. Yep. Whew.
And we shouldn't be surprised that the levels of intelligence, the degrees of intelligence, should vary all across the spectrum. I mean, we have intelligences that inhabit a ladybug or a
Right.
worm, you
Right.
know, or a rose. Everything that is alive is organized matter, meaning that it has been infused with life, intelligence, and spirit matter. And so, and those degrees of intelligence all vary and all fill the measure of their creation, which is why all of those things will be resurrected as well.
Wow. It's expansive.
It's in my, and it just gives birth to so many other questions.
Absolutely. All right. So now we're on to where?
Brigham Young, when Earth was framed and brought into existence, and man was placed upon it, Notice how he says framed, like framing a building.
Right.
It was near the throne of our Father in heaven, which that's where Kolob is. And when man fell, the earth fell into space and took up its abode in this planetary system, and the sun became our light.
Mm.
Now, this is where everybody tends to jump ship because this is just crazy talk. God can't transport a planet.
Kind of
That's a,
defies the name of God, though, right? I mean, like,
right. What can or can't God do, right? He goes on. Brigham Young explained that this is precisely why the direct consequence of Adam's transgression is called the fall. When man sinned, the earth was hurled, this is quoting him now, millions of miles away from its first position. And that is why it was called the fall.
mm.
What expansive thinking. How could God possibly transport a planet, even the speed of light, millions of miles? Well,
Oh, I
yeah,
mean,
I'm letting this cat out of the bag. If Kolob was nigh into the galactic core, that's 27,000, 28,000 light years from where we currently are. For the Earth to traverse that distance, even at the speed of light, would take 27,000 years.
right, but
That's horribly inefficient.
if we start applying maybe some other things like Einstein, a Rosenberg bridge, those sorts of things, which
Now, where would you get such an idea?
uh,
That's just crazy talk.
I watch a lot of science fiction. I don't know. I just read things and it sticks sometimes. But there was something that Einstein came up with where given the right conditions, space could kind of fold in on itself, right? And if that's the case, then the distance gets significantly less. And
Let
I'm
me read.
completely speculating. Let me just say I'm completely speculating.
I'm reading out of Joseph Smith history. This is where I got the idea. Here's Joseph Smith again, being 150 years ahead or 100 years ahead of his time. The angel Moroni had been talking to him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Verse 43. And after this communication, I saw the light in the room begin to gather immediately around the person of him who had been speaking to me. And it continued to do so until the room was again left dark, except just around him. Now, understand, this is a teenager describing something happening with light that he could not possibly ever have witnessed. He has seen candlelight, daylight, moonlight, starlight, and lightning.
Right.
And he's seeing this light, which is gathering, focusing around him. Everything else is dark, except right around Moroni. And I love how succinct he is and how matter of fact it is. And he doesn't riff on it. He just, this is what happened. Then instantly I saw, as it were, a conduit. What do we call that conduit?
Oh,
A pipe, a tunnel,
right.
a conduit open right up into heaven. So not only did he see the conduit, he saw the other side of it.
Okay, so he is seeing kind of that, for lack of a better term. I'm sure there's a way cooler name for it.
Let's go
The
on. He says,
wormhole.
that's right. And he, Moroni, ascended in this tunnel till he entirely disappeared. And the room was left as it had been before this heavenly light had made its appearance.
Ooh.
There's this book that's been out called Mormon Doctrine in the Apocrypha.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I know the guy who wrote it. I guess he's just an absolute stud of an individual.
Yeah, this is unplanned for, but I want. Oh, nuts! I'll just describe it. The section on pillar of light stream. It's called pillar of fire. It's called a lot of different things.
Yeah. Now I'm making connections since you said that. The pillar of light that Joseph sees God the Father and Jesus standing in.
What?
Ooh,
It's consistent.
yeah.
These extra canonical descriptions take that concept even further.
Okay.
My favorite is the one that's in the Dead Sea Scrolls, where it describes the Pillar of Light bus station, the Grand Central Station of the Pillar of Lights in heaven, where these beings of light are continually coming and going through these portals as they accomplish their work.
Which would make perfect sense with that whole "my house is a house of order" thing, right? You're,
Oh
you know,
no, I'm sure God just does things willy-nilly.
right. Wow.
So yes, God has an order. Yes, God has a system. Yes, beings can travel untold distances in an instant, just like walking through a door, because they are so much more advanced than we can possibly imagine.
Yeah.
So if a wormhole is the best way to go 30,000 light years from Earth to God, why wouldn't it be the best, and without any danger or anything happening to it? No getting wind blown or smashed to atoms, God has
Right.
it all figured out. But that could never be true for a planet. It's too big.
Right.
Right. God doesn't have enough power to make it big. He can make a little wormhole, but not a big one. Maybe that it seems pretty. Joseph Smith and that didn't realize what he was doing in that one verse was describing. How could he possibly know that that would converge with dozens of ancient extra canonical texts describing exactly the same thing?
Let's not stop there. He gets proven. Not only does he nail it in the past, but he nails it in the future when Einstein starts proposing these things and
Yeah.
actually putting numbers to it and say, no, you could totally bend the fabric of space given the right conditions,
Yeah.
right? So he's
Yeah.
nailing it in the past, right? Saying, okay, there's this evidence over here that he would not have had access to those records at that time. And then he's nailing it in the future.
Well, and that's just I have a whole presentation on how the teachings of Joseph Smith have been validated by today's science, and that's one of them. All right, I've got to read this one to you just because it's so amazing to me. It's one of my favorites. All right, page 142. I knew I was going to forget some things in our little
You're
discussion.
good. You're good.
It's a lot. It's huge, and it's all your fault.
I
You
know.
made me do it.
I
All
know.
right.
I know.
So
That's
I'm
on me. My bad.
so I'm reading now. Um, page 147 of my book. This is from the Dead Sea Scrolls, page 473.
You're talking about that book that was wrote by that just stud of an individual named Ken Peterson. The
Yeah,
more
well,
the
that guy's
and
crazy.
Apocrypha. That's the one.
He's crazy. He's crazy.
It's awesome.
All right, praise God, exalt him, the glory in the tabernacle of the God of knowledge. The cherubim fall before him and bless him. The cherubims aren't humans.
Right.
They have human features, but apparently they have wings. And they're exalted beings. That's another thought, that there are exalted beings that aren't us. That the plan of salvation is a cooperative effort.
Oh,
Duh. And seraphim, all this
yeah.
stuff. The cherubim fall before him and bless him. As they arise, the quiet voice of God is heard. In fact, Joseph Smith talking about the variety of life forms in eternity.
Right.
Thousands, tens of thousands of life forms that have greater variety than anything we have here on earth. I can't wait. Followed by a tumult of joyous praise. As the cherubim unfold their wings, God's quiet voice is heard. Again, the cherubim bless the image of the chariot throne that appears above the firmament. Then they joyously acclaim the splendor of the luminous firmament that spreads beneath his glorious seat. As the wheel beings advance, Holy angels come and go. Between his chariot throne's glorious wheels appears something like an utterly holy spiritual fire. All around are what appear to be streams of fire, resembling electrum. What's that a word for? Lightning bolts. And shining handiwork, comprising wondrous colors embroidered together, pure and glorious. Could you imagine a person from the first century BC trying to describe this technology? They're doing a pretty good job, though. Wondrous colors embroidered together, pure and glorious. The spirits of the living, godlike beings move to and fro perpetually, following the glory of the wondrous chariots. A quiet voice of blessing accompanies the tumult of their movement, and they bless the Holy One each time they retrace their steps. And it goes on, but these streams of fire and these holy angels beings coming and going,
Yeah.
accomplishing the works of the Almighty.
Ugh.
And there's lots of stuff like that. Oh, look,
It's that book
this is
by that guy.
so the things that Brigham Young taught about the Earth falling, that it was when Adam was placed upon it, it was near the terrestrial. Now, the false assumption that even the Kolob theorem and I think Earth in the beginning makes is the Earth always was there. Clearly, it wasn't. If things were living and dying on it, it wasn't in a terrestrial state.
Right.
Right? Clearly, it was a telestial sphere being used for other things. Then God says, "Now it's your turn. Come on over here and let's put Adam and his posterity on it to fill the measure of its creation." The Earth itself rejoices that it will finally be exalted.
I was just going to say it's the same. Even that testifies of this great plan of progression, right? Even the Earth itself goes through a progression till it fills the
The Doctrine and Covenants states that explicitly, and we will read about that. So in the book of Adam and Eve, it says, Adam is speaking, inasmuch as while he was in the garden and heard the voice of God, and the sound he made in the garden, God made, and feared him, God, Adam never saw the brilliant light of the sun, neither did the flaming heat thereof touch his body. So while he was in the garden, before he fell, he never saw the sun.
Because he wasn't in the same
He wasn't in orbit around the sun.
neighborhood, right? That used that particular light. Okay. All right.
Same book. Adam says, "And this darkness, O Lord, where was it ere it came upon us?" So when this is after the fall, and he's like, "What is this darkness stuff?" And this book is so interesting. It describes what it feels like to descend from a terrestrial being to a telestial being. And Adam hates it. He hurts. He's hungry. He's confused. He can't see God anymore. He can't hear God anymore.
Right.
Where did it come upon us? It is such that we cannot see each other. For so long as we were in the garden, we neither saw nor even knew what darkness is. Eternal day, everlasting burnings, right? There is no darkness in the kingdom of God. Then when God, who is merciful and full of pity, heard Adam's voice, he said unto him, O Adam, so long as the good angel was obedient to me, a bright light rested on him and on his hosts. But when he transgressed my commandment, I deprived him of that bright nature, and he became dark. So it mentions that terrestrial bodies are actually luminous.
Right.
They emit light. And when he was in the heavens, in the realms of light, he knew not of darkness, but he transgressed, and I made him fall from heaven upon the earth, and it was this darkness that came upon him. So when he was on the earth before he fell, there was no darkness.
Right.
Yeah, he wasn't orbiting the sun. Now, where did all of this happen? There are location clues from Earth in the beginning. Surrounding the throne of God is an enormous collection of very great stars, according to Abraham. So the greatest stars in our neighborhood are going to be where God is. Abraham also recorded that somewhere in the middle of this great collection of stars was a group of 15 governing stars, the most eminent of which is called Kolob. Kolob is nearest unto the throne of God. The throne of God is the celestial. Kolob is,
Okay.
people confuse Kolob with the celestial. It's not, it's
Right.
nearest.
It's nearest, right?
And the other thing is important, that where God dwells, there's no time.
Right.
On Kolob, there's time.
Hmm. Yeah. No, that's a
It
good.
passes much more slowly than on
Right.
Earth, but they are related mathematically, at least. In the Joseph Smith's Egyptian alphabet and grammar, um, it states, and I think it's page 15 or 18 of it. It's in the Joseph Smith Papers Project. You can read this directly. God has established laws which regulate the emission of his glory. What do we know about his glory, his fullness? No unclean thing
Right.
can enter into the kingdom of God. Why? Because they would perish.
Yeah, they perish, right? So he's put laws to govern that so that he doesn't burn everything up by his very presence.
Which is why he doesn't appear to us.
Right.
Which is why when he and Christ appeared to Joseph Smith, it was by vision. And even then, Joseph Smith had to be pure enough and worthy enough to withstand the glory of the vision.
Right.
The literal presence would have destroyed the earth, which is why we have the Holy Ghost. So he can communicate with us without condemning us or destroying us until we achieve sufficient purity that we can have the second comforter.
Right.
Section 67. So God has established laws which regulate the emission of his glory so that the right degree of light cheers the face of millions of planets. Let this be this, and this is quoting now what it says. Let this be the center for light, and let there be bounds that it may not pass. He that set a cloud round about the heavens, and the light of the grand governing of 15 fixed stars center there. There it is drawn or contained by the heavenly bodies according to the decrees that God hath set, as the bounds of the ocean, that it should not pass over as a flood. So God has set the bounds of light, lest it pass over and consume the planets.
Ooh.
Some spheres cannot endure the full glory of God. That gives us some clues. Eric Skousen says, note that this protective cloud is round about, or it encircles, it roughly circular. It is also dense enough to block the light from a vast assemblage of powerful stars so that life on our earth and other earths is not threatened with extinction.
Ooh.
That's a pretty good clue.
Yeah.
The prophet Joseph Smith was told that the Father's planetary home is in the midst of his cosmic dominions in a central location where all things are governed by the power of God, who sitteth upon his throne, who is in the bosom of eternity, who is in the midst or the middle of all things.
Okay. Now let me speculate, and again, I'm willing to be wrong. When you
This is
start
why we're friends.
yeah, that's right. When you start talking about a cloud that absorbs that light, the first thing I think of is the Great Rift or the Milky Way, right? That you can see up in the heavens, right? Because it does resemble a cloud a little bit. Now, if we were to take what was just said there, if I'm understanding correctly, that means the presence there, his throne sits in the midst of that. Am I wrong? Did I get that right?
Let's find out. Michael Rhodes, Egyptologist. The word kolob most likely derives from the common Semitic root QLB, which has the basic meaning of heart, center, or middle. In fact, the Arabic form of this word, kalb, forms part of the Arabic names of several of the brightest stars in the sky. Getting closer. J. Reuben Clark. But this fact seems reasonably clear. Now, he was an authority in the church and he was a scientist, I think from the U, I hope I'm not wrong there. But they were starting to understand what a galaxy actually was. He was alive for that discovery because for the longest time, we had no idea that we reside. We didn't know what galaxies were. We didn't know if we even were in one, right?
Right.
but they were starting to discover that in his lifetime, and he says that the hub or center of a galaxy exists and performs in broad principle the functions of Kolob, and that Kolob's existence and function were known about 4,000 years before our day.
Ooh.
Now, here's the fact. This is an annotated illustration map of the Milky Way and what it looks like as far as we can tell. Because we're in it, it's kind of hard to see it. We don't have, and if we could have a satellite that could be that far away to see, that would have to be about 100,000 light years out. We don't have anything close to that to get this picture, but here we are. There's a galactic core. The Milky Way is approximately 100,000 light years in diameter. So this is 50,000 light years. We are about 27,000 light years from the core.
Hmm.
The greatest concentration of radiated energy in the Milky Way is unquestionably at its core, where the radiant energy is so great that were it not for the intervening dust clouds between it and us, all life on Earth would be obliterated.
Ooh. Okay.
So there's this veil of dust surrounding the throne of God, otherwise known as a veil, which is literal and extremely symbolic, but extremely literal.
Right.
Were it not for the veil that surrounds the throne of God, we would perish.
Okay.
But there is just enough light that it cheers the face of millions of planets. Think of this statement that was given 200 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and now
that's lucky. Man, that's lucky.
Right. Once again, pretty good guesser Joseph Smith was.
Yes, he was.
Let me ask you this question. Because now I'm going to go to something else. If we look at Egypt, specifically the pyramids of the Great Pyramid of Giza and its two surrounding.
Yes.
There's a lot of evidence that suggests that at the time of its building, that it correlated with the stars on Orion's belt.
Yeah.
We also see something very similar in South and Central America.
Yes. They aligned their structures with heavenly bodies. That astronomy was important to them. They related astronomy to God. Yeah.
Well, and as the more we go through this conversation, the more it should fascinate Mormons, right? Given that, would it be in the realm of possibility here that there are echoes to that perhaps these ancients knew a little more than we did, and they positioned their structures to reflect this is where God dwells, or this is where we think he may dwell. Yeah.
Well, we know that ancient peoples did because, I mean, they didn't live in cities. And so they could see. I grew up in northern Wyoming, and the stars were wondrous to me.
Right.
My kids don't understand that.
Right.
Living in this little city, they don't get to see the stars. I mean, I'd go out there and go, what in the heck whoa, what's that? What's going on? I mean, it inspired the Greek gods, for that matter.
Right.
They named these constellations. But we know that Abraham taught astronomy to Pharaoh.
Yep.
Right. And that the astronomy was significant, and that the signs of the heavens correlate with the plan of God, because he knows everything and the timing of everything is just right. And, comets, asteroids, the darkening of the sun, moon turning to blood, all of that stuff, the stars falling from heaven, all that sort of stuff is related to the plan and this giant clockwork. And I think the relationship is even greater than that.
Yeah. And I want to say this too, right? And maybe it's so fascinating to me, all of this, because I think if you're raised with this knowledge, so to speak, you might take it for granted, right? Because in most of Christendom, God is not a personage. He is without forms, parts, or passions.
Right. Yeah.
And again, and I bring this up a lot because it is revolutionary within Christendom. So if you grew up in Mormonism, you may not understand the significance of what Joseph did here by by being able to reveal that no, we have proximity to the divine. We have proximity to deity.
We're related to deity.
Yes, not just in time and space, but through familiar relationships, and that's revolutionary in all of Christendom, maybe even all of religion. Period.
Oh, the sacrilege
Yeah, it
in
is
Christendom.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, how dare you? How dare you put something so great as God, even though he's still literally at the center of the universe? But but how dare you give him proximity? So
Yeah. And
no,
there are other implications.
yep.
So the Milky Way is a barred spiral galaxy, they call it, 100 to 120,000 light years in diameter, which contains between, at any given point in time, 1 to 400 billion stars.
Ooh.
And we now know that every single star we can see has orbiting bodies, at least three or four. So it may contain at least as many planets as well. It most certainly does.
Now let
So
me
these,
ask you. Let me
yeah,
ask you one other question here, because I'm looking at this picture of our cosmic neighborhood, so to speak.
yep.
It's got an eerie resemblance to how a tornado moves, or
Um,
hurricane. Excuse me. Is
the Fibonacci sequence.
that what it's called?
Yeah, that spiral pattern that occurs in nature. It's called the Fibonacci sequence, and it seems to be some golden mathematical formula. I read something, and this is going way off to the side, that they were able to examine the cell of an ancient, prehistoric life form that did not follow the Fibonacci sequence. Because all cell and life forms in our world are based on this Fibonacci sequence, is what it's called.
Mm.
But it must apparently be something related to God, the
Yeah.
Father, but not to the not to the prehistoric creation. That's how my mind works. Scary, isn't it? When I saw this first, when I first saw this annotated Milky Way galaxy, I teared up. This is the face of God. This is when I realized. You know what else is really cool about this? And this is the Kolob theorem, the whole idea. I mean, the Kolob theorem talks about a lot of things. It's a free online text, by the way, and it's not very long and it's profound. Um, is leading up to this whole process we've gone through that he believes that the kingdom of God the Father is the Milky Way. If that's true, you and I can step outside during a specific time of the year and we can see Kolob,
Right.
or at least in the direction thereof.
Right.
And the most interesting ancient American tradition I've heard. So during August, late July, and through early September, the orientation of the sky is that you go outside after it gets dark between 9 and say midnight, and the Milky Way is lined up over our heads. You look at Cygnus, the swan, which is this giant cross, the bottom of which points to the galactic core. So it follows the Milky Way down to the southern horizon. And when you find the teapot, I forget what its name is, the spout of the teapot points to the galactic center, Sagittarius A. As it goes down, if you follow the Milky Way, there's a part of it that spurs off to the right and dead ends. The Lakota Sioux say that if you follow the Milky Way, I forget what they called it, it would take you to the Great Spirit. But if you took the wrong passageway off to the right,
Right.
it would lead you to oblivion. I remember the first time I had the courage to go out and look and say, "There you are." I mean, it's a cool thing to me
Yeah, it
to be
should
able to
be.
say, "There you are." At least there you were 27,000 years ago, kind of a thing. But that's all other stuff. So to give us some idea, in this photograph, how many stars can we see with the naked eye on a good night? On a clear night, we can see about 3,000 stars. All we can see, let's go back up here. If this is the Earth, and this is 5,000 light years right here, that circle going around, that's all we can see. That's it.
You know,
We our naked eye cannot see any of the rest of this stuff.
I think it's important too that we put some of this into perspective. We keep throwing out the term light year, and I want to put this in perspective to everyone.
There you go.
What? Oh, never mind.
You're so good. It's like you went through this already. So I wanted to talk about this, the vast. I've had this conversation with people who go, well, sacrilege, are you suggesting that God is just a God of just one galaxy? And I'm like, are you ignorant? A galaxy? Can you comprehend 400 billion stars? Can you comprehend a trillion planets? Can you comprehend infinite time? Oh, he's only the God of a galaxy. I mean, well, what do you think? I mean, there's that hubris at work again. Everybody thinks they're going to have their own galaxy. Buddy, you're going to be lucky if your celestial inheritance is this Earth.
Right.
You'll be lucky. Anyway, so the galactic and even distances between stars are so vast that miles cease to make any sense.
Right.
So they use the term which is called a light year, which is the distance light can travel in a year. Light travels 671 million miles per hour. The distance to the sun is 93 million miles. It takes light 8 minutes to get there. So 8 light minutes. Mars is 12 light minutes away. The closest star to us, to our star, is Proxima Centauri. It takes light 4 years to get there at 671 million miles per hour. The Earth, to the other side of the Milky Way, that would only take us, just directly to the other side, not to the end, is 52,000 light years. The other significant thing, when we look up at the night, or when we look at this, when we look at the eclipse, the light that we're seeing is 8 minutes old.
Yep.
What we're seeing happened 8 minutes ago. That's a cool thing.
I was just going to say, we get to look back in time.
Here you go again. You're getting ahead. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Or when we look at the star, Proxima Centauri, and assuming James Webb could resolve and show us what's happening on that planet or on that star, that happened 4 years ago.
Yep.
The light that's reaching our eye happened 4 years ago. Anyway, so this galaxy is so vast, it takes light 100,000 years to go from one side, from one end to the other.
Ooh.
Brigham Young. Every planet in its first rude organic state receives not the glory of God upon it, but is opaque, meaning it's not luminous. A star is luminous. Only after a planet has reached full maturation and has been resurrected does it shine like a star, which is also true of us.
Right.
Brigham Young again, this earthly ball, this little opaque substance thrown off into space is only a speck in the great universe. When it is celestialized, it will go back into the presence of God, where it was first framed. So it will go back. The call-up theorem is correct. It will be transported again via wormhole, presumably, be celestialized and enter into the celestial realm. Eternal day. Because it'll be, I didn't include this. Brigham Young said something else very interesting. This is out of the call-up theorem. Brigham Young adds that the purified and sanctified earth will be placed in the cluster of celestial kingdoms. So the celestial kingdom is a region in which reside many celestialized worlds.
Ooh.
So if this is the celestial realm, this could constitute the terrestrial realm.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
clearly where we are, this is the telestial realm. And beyond the telestial realm is
Outer
outer
darkness.
darkness. So, and this is fascinating. The closer we are in proximity to God, the greater the glory, which it would have to be in
Right.
order to withstand that purity and that energy that is being radiated. And of course, people mock us who think this. Nobody could possibly live at the center of the galaxy. There's way too much energy. And it's like, that's exactly what God says.
Yeah.
People can't go there. Here's the Doctrine and Covenants explicitly explaining what happens to the earth. The redemption of the soul is through him that quickeneth all things. And it reads over real fast, so I missed it the first time. In whose bosom, in his bosom, near him, near his heart, it is decreed that the poor and the meek of the earth shall inherit it, the earth. So the Beatitudes, Sermon on the Mount. The
Right.
meek shall inherit the earth. Oh, that's nice. No, it's literal.
Right.
That the exalted will live on the earth. Well, the celestialized will live on the earth in its celestialized state in his bosom, in his home. Therefore, the earth, must needs be sanctified from all unrighteousness, that it may be prepared for the celestial glory. What's beautiful about this, everything that he's saying applying to the earth applies to us as well.
Right.
It's the same process. For after it, the earth, hath filled the measure of its creation, it shall be crowned with glory, even the presence of God the Father, that bodies who are of the celestial kingdom may possess it, the earth, forever and ever. For this intent was it made and created, and for this intent they, us, are sanctified.
Whew.
We gloss over that, not getting what it's really saying. That's amazing stuff. Which brings us to section 130. The angels do not reside on a planet like this earth, but they reside in the presence of God in the celestial realm on a globe like a sea of glass and fire, a glorified, sanctified world, where all things for their glory are manifest, past, present, and future, and are continually before the Lord. The place where God resides is a great Urim and Thummim. The sea of glass and fire is the Urim and Thummim. This earth, in its sanctified and immortal state, will be made like unto crystal, and will be a Urim and Thummim to the inhabitants who dwell thereon, whereby all things pertaining to an inferior kingdom, or all kingdoms of a lower order, will be manifest to those who dwell on it. And this earth will be Christ's. And then it goes on and talks about things pertaining to a higher order will be manifest on the white stone given to each of us who enter, each of us, each of those other people who enter the celestial realm.
Right.
Now, we talked about this earlier. Moses, one of the things we skip over. And as one earth shall pass away, and the heavens thereof, so shall another come. Another will take its place. And
Okay.
there is no end to my works, neither to my words. For behold, this is my work and my glory, to bring to pass immortality, eternal life of man. He just keeps doing it, as do we. Joseph Fielding Smith Jr. God our Father is the creator of life, and he placed life on this earth in varied forms, and also on other worlds. He will continue his work on this earth and upon other planets or worlds, because earth and planet are not synonymous, which will take the place of this earth when it has been exalted and gone on to its celestial glory. Same idea.
So he tell right there, and again, if you don't slow down and think about this, where it says another shall come and take its place, right? Another planet. It's that kind of that next man up sort of deal, right? Like,
yeah.
hey, this is created. It filled the measure of its creation. Take it back to the Father, and then something else takes its place to start the process. all over again.
Everything we have viewed thus far is only matter that we can see. Scientists now estimate that dark matter constitutes 63% of the total matter in the universe. So imagine everything we've seen, the Milky Way, right? In this case, we're only seeing less than 40% of it.
Right.
And that dark energy plus dark matter constitute over 95% of the total content of the universe.
Explain what dark matter is.
And I think I have later, but let me point out
Never
here.
mind.
No. When they observe galaxies, other galaxies, they can observe the rotational speed, the speed at which it is rotating, given the laws of physics that we understand, and given the amount of mass that we can see. Is it centrifugal force or centripetal? Which is one that's pulling outward? They're going so fast that they should be flying off into space rather than orbiting the center of the galaxy, which tells them there has to be more mass present than what we can see. So the gravitational forces would keep everything in tow. It's rotating faster than it should be given the mass that they can see.
Gotcha.
So they do the math. So they can't, when they've every tool at their disposal they're applying, trying to figure out where this mass, this gravity is coming from. They can't see it, but they can measure its gravitational force.
Okay.
And so they know it has mass, so it has to be matter, but it's matter that exists beyond the realm of our electromagnetic spectrum that we can detect. That's crazy. Unfortunately, they call it dark matter. It's probably not dark at all. We just can't see it.
Right.
And what is the human assumption? Oh, it's just some cloudy stuff. Not believing that it might have order as well as the world of our matter.
Right.
Now stick with me. Joseph Smith. There is no such thing as immaterial matter. All spirit is matter, but it is more fine or pure and can only be discerned by purer eyes. We cannot see it, but our bodies are pure. But when our bodies are purified, we shall see that it is all matter. He's speaking of the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Moses, I am God. I made the world and men before they were in the flesh. Doctrine and Covenants 29. For by the power of my spirit created I them. Yea, all things both spiritual and temporal. First spiritual, secondly temporal, which is the beginning of my work. And again, first temporal and secondly spiritual, which is the last of my work. What he's talking about is a dual creation.
Right.
We know that about us. We existed as spirits before we were infused with physical matter. Our spirit matter was infused with. So if it's a dual creation, the spirit realm should be at least as massive as the physical realm.
Right.
Perhaps even 63%.
Yeah. Yep.
Kaboom! Somebody was describing on some documentary what dark matter was. It would be like somebody walking into the room and passing right through your body, and you would have no idea. I was like, he just described a spirit.
Yeah.
I think, okay, this is Ken Peterson going on a limb again. I think dark matter is the spirit world.
I think you're right. I think you're right.
What we're looking at here is a rendering, is a theoretical map of the dark matter in our galaxy, because
And
they can measure gravity.
Right.
And notice that the dark matter, and the denser the color, the denser the dark matter. So it's not evenly dispersed. Why
No.
should it be? The world of physical matter isn't. It's in globs and clumps and planets. Well, of course, our Earth, you know what our spiritual home was, the spirits? Probably the spiritual Earth.
Right.
I
Well,
don't know.
I was going to say, looking at that picture there, it bears an eerie resemblance to that same spiral pattern that we saw
You
before.
think? Yeah. What is really cool, let's see, is that the most dense concentrations correlate with these apparent spaces or gaps.
Right.
in our galaxy. Meaning, and remember I talked about the Pistis Sophia describing these spaces,
Right.
kingdoms, and it talks about the region of the 12 invisibles. It's right there where there's nothing.
Right.
This is the realm of spirits. Could
Uh,
this be the home of premortal spirits as they're awaiting their turn to occupy physical bodies and worlds?
okay. Yeah.
And now, I'll be a little crazier. There are different types of galaxies. Spiral galaxies are pretty common. There are less common called ring galaxies, which have a dense center and an outer ring and nothing in the middle. I submit to you that is a baby galaxy where what the gods are doing is fusing spirits with physical matter. And when it's all done, you will see a galaxy that looks like lenticular galaxies, where everything is diffused.
Okay.
The spiritual realm, these empty lanes no longer exist.
Right.
The youngest ones, you'll see nothing but spiritual lanes. Those are
Right.
those ring galaxies. Anyway, I'm saying way too much.
You're
The
not
most
saying much.
the most important image ever taken in history is acclaimed to be the Hubble Deep Field. In 1995, shortly after the Hubble was repaired, scientists did something extraordinary. They pointed the Hubble at nothing. They pointed it at what was it? The head of a pin held at arm's length, and they pointed it at the darkest part of the night sky, like by the handle of the Big Dipper or something. They pointed it at nothing and focused it on that spot for like a week or something, so it would gather as much light as possible. They were trying to see how far they could see, which was going to tell them how old the universe is, because it would be the oldest light that they could see.
Okay.
Brilliant. So where the naked eye sees nothing, this is what Hubble saw.
Oh, because all of those bright spots on that picture, those are other galaxies, right?
They are all galaxies, except to see the diffraction spikes here
Right.
and here. Those are stars that got in the way, that photobombed the picture. 3,000 galaxies in a
Ooh.
spot where the naked eye sees nothing. 3,000 galaxies. And they thought, is this a fluke? So they pointed it in every other direction. What did they see? Exactly the same thing. The density of the dispersion of galaxies in the universe is essentially the same everywhere, generally speaking. And you do the math. What was that? Something held at arm's length. I don't know. And the math is over 300 billion galaxies
Jeez.
within what's called the light bubble, how far Hubble can see. The last photo I will show you is the James Webb doing the same thing, and it's the same thing. Only, so they're supposed to be seeing the very earliest galaxies, and they figured it's 13 billion light years away, 13.7 or 13.9 billion light years away, which should be baby proto-galaxies.
Right.
What the James Webb, the new telescope is showing them are fully formed spiral galaxies at the beginning of the universe, which tells you what the scriptures already tell us. There is no beginning.
Right.
And astronomers, when I've heard one when asked what is beyond our light bubble, and they said probably more of the same.
Well, and now it starts to become apparent how there can be gods many, right? If
How can it be otherwise?
right, if each one of those are its own galaxy, mimicking our own, I shouldn't say mimicking,
But in the same pattern.
have the same pattern as our own. This does something else too, Ken, which for so long there was this idea of space is chaotic without
Yeah.
form.
Yeah.
It utterly violent.
Yeah.
Now, and not that it's not somewhat violent, right? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
asteroid impacts say that. But what this does do is it shows an order to all things. And if you start saying, okay, there's an order to all things, it begs the existence of something far more intelligent, of greater significance than we can possibly fathom.
These, I'm trying to remember exactly who, but there are some renowned astronomers and uh, an astrophysicist who are absolutely convinced in the existence of a higher power because of the order and the balance of energy and power at the atomic level and at the macro level. Uh, it, that exists in such order. And even there are galaxies that have collided. Nothing actually touches because the distances are so fast. But even that is a creative event. Stars are created and born through that. I mean, it's like life, this creative process. These galaxies come together or even pass through each other or combine. The largest galaxy is 10,000 times bigger than the Milky Way.
Holy cow.
It's one of these big lenticular galaxies. So the plan of salvation, if it blew your mind to consider the Milky Way galaxy as the kingdom of God, this made me cry.
Right.
From eternity to eternity, I am the same. There is no end to my works. Worlds without number. Holy smokes. We can see with technology what prophets only saw by vision. And we're the only intelligent species in existence. How ignorant. Prior to 1995, if you believed in extraterrestrial life forms, people would laugh at you for being crazy. That was me. And now people look at this and it is inevitable.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. Inevitable.
How how can we be it?
Right.
Various galaxy types, spirals, ellipticals, peculiar, they're odd-shaped ones, irregular, barred spiral. These irregular and peculiar are very young, small, baby galaxies, which is crazy. If everything was happened at the same time, 13.7 billion years ago with the Big Bang, the laws of entropy should have said we should all be the same age and breaking down already.
Right.
But there's
Right.
still there are new creations happening, even at our galactic core. There is a creative force at work. Perspective. Earth resides in our solar system, a star system. Our, our solar system resides in a interstellar neighborhood. These are our closest stars, 10, 20, maybe 100 light years out. This is 100,000 light years, our galaxy.
Holy
So
cow.
our interstellar neighborhood is right here. Our galaxy exists in a local galactic group. There's us, this is Andromeda. Andromeda is our closest major galaxy. All of these are satellite galaxies, small galaxies,
Hmm.
most of which will eventually be gobbled up by the Milky Way. And in time, the Milky Way and the Andromeda will combine. We're headed toward each other. Fortunately, it's 2.2 million light years away. So we got a few million years before we have to worry about that. And even then, it'll be like a big party, I suppose.
Right.
Our local galactic group is part of a supercluster. Here's our group, and here's all these other clusters of galaxies. Our supercluster is a part of local superclusters, which is part of the observable universe.
And
And
that's
here's where
just
things,
observable.
yeah, here's the crazy thing. The light bubble, meaning that's as much light as we can see because that's when time began,
Right.
or so they say. But here's the problem. This is 13.7 billion light years, but it's also 13.7 billion light years in that direction. That's almost 28 billion light years. And we're right in the middle? No.
Right.
And some have speculated that the universe is actually 96 billion light years across. How do you how can you explain a universe that is bigger than time? They said, well, at the Big Bang, they broke the laws of physics and expanded faster than it should have. I mean, they're all spitballing at this point,
Right.
right?
Right.
Moses, and were it possible that man could number the particles of the earth, yea, millions of earths like this, so all the particles of the earth time millions of earth, it would not be a beginning to the number of my creations.
Mm.
This photograph is of the globular star cluster in the Omega Centauri, a part of our galaxy. Star clusters are these groups of very old stars that kind of orbit our galactic halo, our galactic core. And that's a star cluster. It's
You
like a
know,
jewel box.
that one and the Hubble one. The other thing that I'm also astounded by is the vibrancy of color,
Yeah.
right? Typically, we think of space as black and white, right? Light in the absence thereof. This is a different picture.
You can imagine in his essay, Unrolling the Scrolls of Some Forgotten Witnesses, Hugh Nibley, and I forget what the exact extra canonical reference is, quotes it saying that Christ, well, it's in Pista Sophia, telling his disciples that there are many different kinds of light, much more than what we see here
Mm.
on Earth. That must be my cue that we're at the end. Um, there are many worlds that have passed away by the word of my power. There are many that now stand, and innumerable are they unto man. But all things are numbered unto me. For they are mine, and I know them. The heavens, they are many. Some people interpret that as galaxies,
Right.
and they cannot be numbered unto man. But they are numbered unto me, for they are mine. And as one earth shall pass away, and the heavens thereof, so shall another come. And there is no end to my works, neither to my words. This is the the James Webb Space Telescope, deep field. And there you have it. We survived.
So, as I've been sitting here thinking about this, and what I'm going to take away from this, it's this, that it's absolutely astounding when you stop to think about the breadth of time and space that happens, that everything God has to work with in order to keep this whole plan going. But it's all for one thing. Right? It's for us. We should be both humbled as well as encouraged at the same time, that it really is all for his children, right? And if it is all for his children, then truly, we've heard it before, but truly, then the governing idea that has to be over this whole thing, emanating from the very throne of God, is love. Love for his children, love for his creation, and for the hope that we can ascend to where he's at.
Yeah, I love that in the context of the verses that we as Mormons uniquely understand. Why God gets up in the morning, so to speak, right? In Moses is where we find that. The very first chapter, the first thing he does to Moses is he shows him the world and the ends thereof, verse 8. And all the children of men which are and which were created. And then the presence of God, he just showed him this world. And then the presence of God withdrew from Moses, and he fell to the earth. And it came to pass, it was for the space of many hours before Moses did again receive his natural strength. And he said unto himself, now for this cause I know that man is nothing, which thing I never had supposed.
Right.
So you see what God's doing. And watch what happens in a minute. But So Moses was second in power in Egypt, and God had to show him that that's nothing. That is
Right.
nothing. So Moses was humbled, and then he flips it on him. And so now we see in the same chapter, after Satan tries to deceive him at his weakest, then God in verse 35, but only account of this earth and the inhabitants thereof give I unto you, for behold, there are many worlds that have passed away by the word of my power. And we read about that. Or behold, so after he humbles Moses, and then he shows Moses all of this stuff, and then says, what I've shown you, multiply that times millions upon millions. Moses is feeling extremely insignificant. Then he flips it on him and says, but all of it's for you.
Yeah.
All of this stuff you see, all of these amazing, incredible possessions and creations, the reason this is all here is to bring to pass your immortality and eternal life.
Hmm.
God-bearing worlds,
Yep.
the ancient texts call it. It's
Man.
the greatest, the greatest story ever told.
Yeah.
And it's true.
Telling you, it was a heck of a guess for a farm boy from upstate New York.
Even if it weren't right, it would still be the most incredible story ever told. But then for it to actually be not only plausible but provable
Right.
and verifiable and vindicated by science and time.
Yeah.
Even
Ken.
I have to even I have to believe it.
Yeah. Ken, that was absolutely awesome. Thanks for coming back on, my man.
Yeah.
I'll be thinking about this one for weeks.
Yeah, we'll be thinking about it until we get it all, I imagine.
Yeah.
Because every time they point the James Webb in a different direction, it adds. I mean, every time something new is discovered, my brain tries to fit it into this model,
Yeah.
and it is astonishing, amazing, because it all fits amazingly into the plan. The plan gives it all context.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
No, thank you, dude. I appreciate it. Like I said, this is one of those that I feel like it's healthy because we get a little bit of that sense that Moses got of like slow your roll. You're not that important, right? And or you're not that special, maybe. But then God flips it and says, "But it's all for you. It's all for you. I do this because I love you." And
And the contemplation of the eternities, which Joseph Smith was constantly trying to get the saints to do, is
right,
partly why we have temples, to
yep,
help us see the long view, the greater perspective, that the minutia of our lives, that the pain and the struggle and the effort is a part of this vast and a significant part of this vast eternal plan. And I was thinking about this. The the Nauvoo saints, the Nauvoo temple, they were under fire, under pressure to leave, and they were desperately working to finish this temple enough so that they could use it. Why? It was Brigham and others were desperate to endow the saints. And I'm like, why? Endow them with power, power to do. They still had to trudge across 1,000 miles of desert and pull their belongings. I mean, they didn't have any magical power to transport themselves, and people still died and froze, and they still had to work hard. It wasn't the kind of power that we see in superhero movies. It was this long view. It gave them the perspective and the faith and the courage and the strength to endure everything they had to endure. That's the power, which is embodied in Come Come Ye Saints, where
absolutely,
they, which they sing. And should we die before our journey's through, happy day, all is well. We then are free from toil and sorrow too. With the just we shall dwell. But if our lives are spared again to see the saints their rest obtain, oh, how we'll make this chorus swell. All is well. What a perspective. And they
right.
sang that. They sang that for 1,000 miles in this desert. And that perspective was given to them through the endowment among
Right.
the other restored doctrines.
I love what what Nibley had said, and I'm going to butcher this horribly, so forgive me. But he talks about at times in his books when talking about the temple that it's taking the infinite and then putting it inside of a of something that we can wrap our minds around.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's
Yeah.
even
Yeah. Yeah.
there's even allusions to sacred geometry there, right? As
Oh yeah.
squaring the circle, right?
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and so there's a lot there to be had, and I guess whatever flavor of Mormon you are, I would just say listen to this once before you go to the temple next time, and
Think
then
about
try to understand that what the temple is doing is taking exactly what Ken and I and me extremely crudely. Ken's way better at than I am, but taking these things and scaling it so you can begin to wrap your mind around it. That's really the mystery and the beauty of the temple.
one of the first. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, no, you're good. I was just going to say, and that's what the temple is for. It's the long game. It's to try to begin to understand a little bit what eternity is, and that that view from above that we can have.
When I was first trying to put together the location of God and reading some of this stuff, and I had come to that same kind of conclusion even before I'd read some of these books. Part of it was a symbolism of the prayer circle,
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
where God is at the center.
Yep.
We surround him. And Lehi, speaking of joining the heavenly choirs above, surrounding the throne of God. The symbolism of that is not accidental.
No, no, it's not. Well, that's beautiful. Ken, again, thanks so much
And
for
the
coming back on.
veils.
What's that?
And the veils. We forgot to riff on the
We
veils.
did forget to riff on the veils.
The veil
But
in the temple, what that symbolizes. And the veils that are talked about in these extra canonical texts and that Brigham Young referred to, the angels that stand as sentinels
yeah,
that guard the way. I forget when, but this awesome quote that there are veils that we must pass through as we approach, and it, the Kolob theorem approach between the sun or between where we are now and the galactic core. There are very specific kingdoms and veils, literal dust veils, that we must pass through and that we have to be prepared to pass through
right.
by covenants that we have made through these sacred ordinances that prepare us to do so. And the Pistis Sophia details that very process that we're taught
Absolutely.
about in our earthly buildings, in our temples.
Absolutely. Whew. Well, Ken, this was awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for bearing with me. This was a long one. It's a big
Bearing
one.
with you nothing, man. This was awesome.
We covered a lot of ground, didn't we?
Light years of it. Um,
I thought about this too. If the universe really is 13.7 billion years old, that means we've had about 5 eternities.
yeah, yeah. I mean, look, there's so much to take away out of this conversation. I mean, I think it may be one of the few times that, publicly speaking, someone's dared to say, no, 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 an eternity is quantifiable. Einstein would be proud.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I got nothing to lose. If I were had a position of authority or something like that, I'd have to watch out. But I'm just a guy who I can say this stuff.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff. And it rings true, right? I mean, everything we talked about here is testified of either through scripture, through the words of Joseph Smith, or just through the order
You
of
know
the
what though?
galaxy that's there.
Even if it's not exactly true, the fact that we can even go there, that we can find a model that really does fit what the restored gospel teaches is thrilling. To
Yeah.
even ponder that and to be able to see the pattern of God in all of creation.
Right.
Ah,
It's awesome.
that's worth it right there. And a friend of mine once said, um, if you are prepared enough to ask the right question, the answer cannot be far behind. So just in the process of pondering these things,
Yep.
reckoning, like Brother Brigham, it'll get us somewhere.
I've often thought that the Lord gauges our spiritual maturity and ability to handle certain pieces of information based solely upon our questions. So
This friend of mine called it the hedge of revelation.
right. No, yeah,
It protects the unprepared from the mysteries and the mysteries from the unprepared.
absolutely.
And we're prepared enough to ask the right question, we might be prepared to understand the mystery.
Absolutely.
Although if we try and force the issue, we will, uh, Elder Packer in his masterful talk, Candle of the Lord, talked about if we try and force God, try to force the understanding of God, we can be misled.
Yep.
So we can do all of our part, do our studies and ask the right questions and be patient as God feels we are ready to receive greater light and knowledge.
Absolutely. Beautiful stuff, my man. Let's do it again.
Thanks, David. Okay.
All right.
I,
Bye,
what
everybody.